So it is April 22nd, 2025, meeting of the zoning bylaw review steering committee. Here today I'm Pat DeShames, Community Economic Development Director, Jim Crawley, Building Commissioner, Kelsey Karowski, Planning Board Member Rep, and Ed Forsberg, Member at Large. Looks like Sarah Khatib and John O'Leary are not here yet, but we'll just get going without them until they can join us. So at this meeting, we also have Carolyn Murray of KP Law, our consultant on the project. Kind of help walk us through this kind of next phase, starting to deal with section 5 in particular. Last time we met, we went over section 9, and I know I got you some comments from the committee, and I think it might be good just to kind of touch base one more time on that before diving into section 5. If everyone has the copy of section 9 with some of the, I think I labeled it ZRST edits. So, starting at the top, Caroline, I want to ask you this. So you made a comment, or deleting non-conforming situations, non-compliant situations, non-conforming structures 10 years or older. I think my comment when we brought this up is I missed going over this with the group. Why are these definitions no longer needed in those sections?
I just found them rather confusing. State law uses non-conforming, like whether you're a non-conforming structure or you're a non-conforming use, or you might be an undersized, non-conforming lot. But talking about non-conforming, non-compliant structures, non-compliant situations, it seemed like we were adding some unnecessary definitions in there, as opposed to we could simplify it and talk about lawful non-conforming structures, buildings, lots, and kind of break it down that way.
Okay.
But if somebody has a strong reason why these other definitions might be necessary elsewhere, we can certainly talk about it, but I think it just, to the reader, it's a little more confusing than it needs to be.
I'm all for clearing it up. I think I just wanted to make sure we understood why that is being
simple for me.
Yeah. Next comment, I think we answered, it was an alternative, deleting section 1 entirely to keep the bylaw format consistent with other sections. We can instead simplify, and we agreed to keep the proposed new language. So that was problems there. So the next page, so this would be within section 9.2, general provisions, what is currently subsection C, nonconformity resulting from public action. And we noticed in subsection 9.5a, line 4, that public action was replaced with government taking. Should this also be changed to government taking in this situation, or is this a different meaning?
I think so, because if you actually look at the text under paragraph C, even though the heading talks about nonconformity resulting from public action, we then start by saying, if as a result of public acquisition. That to me means a government taking for some reason, some sort of eminent domain, that maybe we widen a roadway and you lose, some portion of your lot area as a result of that. I can't think of what else, what other public acquisition. I mean, if we acquire the property, that doesn't change, for a new purpose, that doesn't change whether it's a non-conforming structure or a non-conforming lot. So I think that's what the intent is here. So I would suggest changing it to a government taking, unless anyone can think of a different type of public action or public acquisition that would come into play.
Okay. Yeah, I think Sarah brought this up. She caught that last time. So it was in the other comment. So we'll put a note there, and I'll send you just a copy. So we'll change that to government taking.
Yeah, that's the only taking that would make it,
Would it give it any
non-conforming
protection?
allowable.
Yeah,
right?
we'll give it any
Anything else
protection.
would not, like if they sold it to a private party, that's on you really, right? It's
Yeah.
not,
Right,
because I have an example, a property that I own, the state came in the fifties, late fifties, and took away a lot of the land to make the bridge over the railroad tracks. So I guess when, prior owned it to me, when he bought it, like, half the house was taken out, but I have, a plot plan with a house at street level with the walkway coming out and the driveway and everything right at street level. Now it's like, can't see the street.
Yeah, because we have some lots in town that were made non-conforming, but they sold their land for $1 to the town,
mhm,
so that's not a taking.
No, yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
loses the protection when you do it that way.
right.
yeah, that's a good point.
So next comment is, following page, and this one, I think this is a question we had from John, I wish he was here to kind of explain a little bit more, but this was, we were moving the section dealing with, special permit and variance uses are not non-conforming uses, that whole thing was being removed. And his comment, and, you know, kind of paraphrasing this one, I wrote it in here because it was from John, but, would it be appropriate to state within the zoning that a variance is not a non-conforming situation? That way it's clear to the reader slash homeowner. Is there a way to simplify this, or is that language just not needed?
I looked at that and I would agree, we could add at least, or salvage some language from that subparagraph 1.
Okay,
Just to make it clear, 'cause you're right, the average homeowner isn't going to understand what, well, I got, you know, I was previously approved by a special permit or previously approved by a variance. They don't understand what that means. So I can work with that to salvage some of the language from paragraph 1.
okay,
What I would not add back in, however, is anything from paragraph 2, that says, you know, we can grant an additional special permit or an additional variance. We have the power to do that.
there it
You
is.
know, there's no need we have to confuse folks with that.
Okay. Sounds good to me. Kind of takes care of
I'm good
John's
with that.
comment, yeah.
No, I'm good with that.
Okay. One thought, if I could jump in before we move on to the next comment, I was looking this over again today. In paragraph D,
Yeah,
you know, when something is moving closer to becoming more conforming, it can't revert. We did, I think, move some language in what is now going to become 9.8.
yes.
Yes, it's paragraph 5, so, okay. Because I thought that was good language not to lose entirely.
Okay. John?
So, yeah.
All right, and the weeds mixed up.
Oh. Wait, I'm moving twice, so I understand. So John, we're just going over section 9 again, going over some of the comments we had from the last meeting. So Karen, can you explain that to me one more time under, section 9(2)D?
We move that language to what becomes the new section 9.8 on the next page. It's currently labeled subparagraph G, but we're gonna change it to 9.8.
Okay,
And if you
yep,
look at paragraph 5, that talks about a lawful non-conforming use, if it's brought into conformity,
got
it
it.
shall not be permitted to revert to a non-conforming use. Or closer to conformity, it can't go backwards, so that language is being preserved there.
So we don't need it under D, it's not preserved under,
Right.
I got it, alright. So this moves to. Alright, so the next comment underneath that, you recall that the diagnostic report recommended adding the underlined text, which is 92E, in the zoning bylaw, thereby rendering the same text here unnecessary. However, these amendments to section 6 are not currently being considered. I've added the text here so it's not lost in the process. So, I think it's understood. I think we want to include these changes to section 5 with the amendment to section 6 as well in order to keep them together. So, that kinda goes back to, I know we haven't got revisions to section 6 yet, but probably
Right.
wanna try and tie that together
Yep.
and bring it forward.
We can do that. So if you then see it deleted in 5, you'll see it appear in 6.
Okay. Next one, dealing with 92G, which we just talked about, now it's being moved to 9.8, so that section is gonna be its own new subsection. No concerns there. 9.5, non-conforming lots, this seems to be where most of the comments are coming from. Well, that and off-street parking, which is a whole nother mess. So I think your comment was under, I guess what is essentially the first sentence, but starting at the second line, the annulling portion at the time of recording or endorsement, whichever occurs sooner. Your comment was, does the highlight text have any significance in this context? Normally, this language is used when protecting undersized lots from merging with adjacent commonly owned lots, but that does not appear to be relevant here. Instead, it may be superfluous. Does the second sentence seem to be redundant? And the committee wanted to keep both these highlighted sentences, but might need more explanation and discussion at the committee, so I guess that's where we're here, so maybe just discussing that with us a little bit.
And maybe it's, again, recognizing that you guys deal with this bylaw much more frequently than I do, and I'm the person coming in with, a fresh set of eyes looking at this and saying, well, what exactly does this mean? I mean, I know from dealing with the subdivision control law what it means to say a time of recording or endorsement referring to a lot shown on a plan. But we don't actually make reference here to a lot shown on a plan, like as of a certain date. So instead we just say, no lot that does not comply with this bylaw with respect to minimum lot area or frontage or width, etc., then in effect, at the time of recording or endorsement, whichever occurs sooner, shall be subdivided or otherwise changed in area or shape. So what is I still come back to, what is the significance of that at the time of recording or endorsement? Are we talking about we're talking about something that is pre-existing as of a certain date and time?
Which one
Or-
are we looking at again? Excuse me.
This is 9.5,
9.5.
A.
A, okay.
the very first sentence there. Because then if you continue with the the next highlighted sentence that says, a lot already non-conforming with respect to these provisions should not be changed in area shape so as to increase the degree of non-compliance. It seems to me that they both say, if you've got a non-conforming lot, you can't subdivide that lot to make it more non-conforming, not in any way. So I don't know that we need the first sentence if we've got the second sentence. But I'm certainly open to any thoughts folks have as to why that might be needed to keep that first sentence. Or maybe we combine the two to make it clear that a lot that is already non-conforming with respect to area, frontage, lot width, etc., shall not be subdivided so as to be changed in area or shape or increase the nonconformity,
To
Mm-hmm.
make
maybe that.
it more non-conforming.
Right. Does that seem to make,
Yeah, because at the time of the recording really doesn't matter too much, it's just, right?
No, because normally, the significance of saying at the time of recording or endorsement, you're sort of freezing the lot at a date and time to say that if it occurred on a, if it appears on a plan prior to a date, and we have no date, but if it appeared on a plan prior to a date, it might be protected. But that's,
But we're
we're
not
not,
doing
we're
that.
not offering protection here, right, so
So there's no reason to worry about it in terms of.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Well, the whole idea behind grandfathering is if something was in compliance before the bylaws went into effect,
Mhm.
it's still complying. Well, it's non-conforming, but it still complies.
So it all depends on when the bylaw went into effect, so like we're changing the bylaws now, so we could be rendering, if we just reduce lot sizes in this town, we could be rendering a whole new batch of lots non-conforming at that
Right.
time. So again, like the open space law that was up in Emerald Way, all those lots are 100% non-conforming right now, because they're all over the 8-year protection, and our debt zoning's gone since 2008, I think. So that rendering that non-conforming, so I get where Caroline's coming from. I think it's more of a definite, this kind of more of saying what a non-conforming lot is. It is either existing or non-existing, because it's a moving target. Because we could have a lot that's been there since 18 something, there might be no record of it besides the fact it was there. It was never endorsed, it was just someone had land.
The only other thought I have is that first sentence has that exception that, no lot that doesn't comply can be altered except through public action, through a governmental taking. Again, though, if it's a non-conforming lot and the state, the county, the town decides we need to take a portion of that lot for some reason, we'd simply go ahead and do it. It's not going to impact the fact that the lot is still non-conforming. It's gonna just be less conforming.
And besides the fact, we said it earlier,
Right,
so we already know that that's the case. So it's almost like you continue that first sentence, a minimum lot size and requirements which make it a non-conforming lot shall not be subdivided, something like that.
right.
Does that make sense to you, Jim? Or, I
Say that
mean,
one
you're the
more
one that
time.
has to enforce it.
Can you repeat that, please?
Well, I'm just saying that,
Yeah.
in that first sentence, if it does, no law which does not comply with the provisions of bylaw with respect to minimum area, minimum lot frontage, and minimum width, which make this, I don't know the proper words to say it, which make it non-conforming,
Mhm.
shall not be subdivided. I mean, that's pretty simple, but, I mean, you can put it in lawyer speak, but
Right, no, and I think I would actually, if you wouldn't mind a friendly amendment, to then continue with the second sentence to say, so as to increase the degree of noncompliance. Because we might get, saying it can't be subdivided, I don't know that we have to be mindful of the fact that someone could come in with, say, an A&R plan and take a small portion of a lot, convey it to another lot. Still may not become a fully conforming lot, as to say lot size, frontage, or whatever, but we don't wanna say nothing can ever be subdivided. We do wanna make sure that you can add to, you just can't take away from.
so you might say to make it more non-conforming.
Right,
Right.
right.
I look to Jim all the time to see how you interpret it and how easy it is gonna be for you to explain. You gotta draw a line in the sand, right?
Yeah, no, I think from both sides when changes, I think of, to your point, how I interpret and how I tell people, but then also think of from the point of the developer, how he can use it to get around it.
Right.
Are we leaving any like loopholes for
Yeah.
people? So I kind of think both ways to see, yeah, I can explain it, but make sure it covers us on the back end as well. But yeah, no, something like that, that's an easy, and that's an
Okay.
easy explanation to anybody.
Do we wanna try to wordsmith it now?
I
or
can,
do we
I
wanna-
can, or I'm gonna have to incorporate some of these changes,
Yeah.
so I'm happy to try and wordsmith it and put this back into a full sentence.
Alright, yeah.
How's that?
Maybe we'll try that and then we'll have
Okay.
to
Yeah.
think about it right now.
I think we're all on the same page, it's just
Right.
getting the right language,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Alright. So. Comment 4, so the committee prefers the language highlighted in 9.5C. So,
So we'll
Okay.
keep that in.
we're keeping that one in.
Mhm.
There's some discussion, I think, Phil, you might be one that might have brought this up, that whether or not a table as a visual might be helpful for a homeowner in terms of
Yeah, essentially a
understanding.
tabular form, some kind of,
I don't know if that's anything you've seen in other towns, Carolyn, or just trying to.
With respect to just paragraph B, that a one-family or two-family dwelling shall not be deemed a non-conforming building solely due to the lot's deficiency in area or frontage, is that where you were thinking of a table?
or I think it was C, was it C? Was that, I didn't bring my own notes, so.
I was gonna say, it could be that the little bubble is pointing to the wrong paragraph, but
Could be, yeah.
on mine, it's relating to the sentence in paragraph B.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what
same.
That may be what I was thinking.
I don't know. I don't know if we wanna go back.
So it's
to
kind of
that,
like a
but-
decision tree, you know,
Mhm.
if
Oh,
this is true.
yeah, I think that's what you were
Just
talking about, if
Yeah.
I'm
So
correctly,
you
Phil,
got the
was.
different variables and then the
Yeah, if
action.
you are not, I think Phil was on this, if you ask the question, is your lot conforming, and you go yes, then you go down this side, if it's no, you come over here. Because people get me something between what's a conforming lot and what's not a conforming building.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there is the cases that say if you're in a conforming lot by default, the building's not conforming, even though it is conforming, can get tricky. So I think Phil wanted that, just to like it, Bill Phil's at a tree, if I remember correctly. That was it, is if
Flow
you,
chart.
yeah,
Yeah.
if someone triggers,
Sometimes it's hard to read through to see
Right,
exactly
right.
what the.
Just,
Right.
So, but if that's done, you know, that was, I think that was the question.
Sometimes it's, or the, or there'll be, an illustration,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
plopped in,
Yeah.
like, what does this really mean, or, so for example, if,
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we could
So-
certainly talk about doing something like that.
So are you saying, if the lot is non-conforming, say in area, right? As long as the dwelling has the proper setbacks, you'd be okay with the building? I mean, it doesn't make the building non-conforming, so you could actually maybe add on to it as long as you don't.
yeah, so if
You
you have a
maintain the
non-conforming,
setbacks.
if you have a non-conforming lot, which we have plenty of in this town, but you already have a pre-existing structure, the structure itself can be either conforming as a structure to our setbacks or non-conforming as being in a setback. And that depends the level of protection. So say if a building was 3 feet over the setback line, and it's been there since 1900, now that's created, it's a non-conforming building with a side yard non-conformity. You can get a special permit to increase that non-conformity right now in this town. But if your house was right on the line, it made out of setbacks, that house could be the exact same as the one that's 2 feet in. That's a conforming house on a non-conforming lot. That, it's like the thing I always tell people, if you're wrong in Massachusetts, you're better, you get away with more. If that house is conforming to our setbacks on a non-conforming lot, you can expand it, but you can't go into your setback, you can't create a new non-conformity.
Right. you
That's where
can't- You can't go into the setback.
you
what you're
can,
saying.
but if you're already in
But
there,
you can,
if
if
you're
you're
already
already
in,
in there,
you
if
can
you're not in there, you can't.
you can't go in, no, then that's a variance.
But you can go bigger if you're already in.
If you're already in there, you can expand and
Yeah.
I
actually
thought you couldn't expand in the direction of non-conformity.
So our zoning says you can, but state law says you can, because you're not creating it. So if I'm in a side yard setback, and you say, well, I want to go bigger into that side yard, the first house is non-conforming to the side yard. You want to go more into it, you're still non-conforming to the side yard. You've increased the non-conformity, but you haven't created a new non-conformity. So our one says that they'd rather you can go for a special permit to go more into it, but if you decide, if your house say was over the line and you want to go back in front or go this way, our zoning says you can expand it in any other direction as of right. If you want to go more into the setback, then that's a special permit.
The way they have it written,
The
too,
way
it's
they've
kind of
written, yeah.
subjective, it's basically fits
I don't like
into.
Because it might like it, but I must admit, when it came to Walpole, their zoning on non-conformity was ahead of the game because state law says you can go into it. Because I know some towns have this zoning law that if you're, say, 10 feet in your setback and you want to go up a second story, I believe Westwood still have it, you have to step back to your setback line and
Right.
go up.
Right,
Gale v. or Bialta v.
Deidre.
Brookline.
And be out, yep,
The Brookline not only says you can go straight up, you actually shall be issued a permit. That's case law. Because a gentleman in Brookline put a dormer on his roof, and the neighbour appealed it because he's already in the setback. But the court said, well, what did he create new? Nothing. His house was already 10 feet in, you went straight up, you've created nothing new.
well, I kind of disagree with that. I mean, he is making it more non-conforming
Yeah.
when he has more area of the house and
it's
the
an
non-conforming.
intensification, yes,
Right.
yep.
It's an increase of it, but it's not a
Mhm.
creation. And that's where the laws go on. So our zoning does say, to John's point where he was saying if you're already in a setback, it does say if you go in any other direction, straight up, backwards, back into where you're conforming, that's a permit. You come down building permit and we'll give you a permit. But if you want to take that setback of 10 feet and go 3 more feet into the setback that you're already in, that's a special permit in this town. And even if we denied it, that's a pretty, I'll defer to the expert, but that's a very easy case win. Even
Mhm.
some of my limited IQ would actually win that in court, I'd say. Because there's so many cases that protect you from being, that's what I'm saying.
We can't be more restrictive.
Not, and you lose 10 times out of 10 on that.
No, you can be more permissive in some ways under zoning, but not more restrictive.
That's why I always tell
It's like
them,
the opposite of
It is,
everything else.
It is,
Yeah.
yes,
Right?
it is.
that's why I always
yeah.
tell people when they come to us in 1 and 2 families, being wrong in Massachusetts is better than being right. You would get more protection and get away with more being wrong than you would have been spot on or perfect.
So if you had a 30-foot setback you're supposed to have, and you're already only 25 feet, you could go, how close?
All
10 feet?
So,
technically can go as far as you want to. Again, I'll defer to the expert, but the way the law, my understanding of it is as long as you're not detrimental to the neighbourhood,
Mhm.
you could technically go, if you could find 2 more houses on the street that are like within 2 feet of the front line, you could move all the way to 2 feet within the front line.
so we kind of default to like where the ZBA kind of kicks in, where it goes to that special permit process. We had one situation where, coming in with the cul-de-sac that's right by the high
Oxy.
school.
I could call it oxycodone, I keep saying it wrong, it's
Ox.
it's
no,
oxy,
I don't know.
yeah.
It's a-
Accident.
That one,
Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
I can't pronounce
So there
it.
was a home, they were looking to do an addition, and it was already non-conforming to the rear yard setback, and they wanted to get closer to the rear yard setback. Well, the first one they came in with, it was like 2 feet from the rear yard setback and basically almost in the high school parking lot. So the zoning board through that process where, well, can you work with us, can you try to have it a little bit more in line with where that existing home is? And so, you know, to have it more in conformance, I guess, with the neighborhood, that was that whole special permit process. It was still a non-conforming addition, but I guess just through that process, they would have it be, you know, 7 feet as opposed to
I think
2
I
feet.
mentioned years ago on Riverside Place over here,
Yeah,
the house that I was working on at the time, they were able to go closer to the street into the setback
Mhm.
because the rest of the houses
Yeah,
in the street were already in the setback. And
Oh, and wasn't
he
an
would-
averaging of
Right, and he
area?
was allowed to
Mhm.
go because it was like,
it's not detrimental to the rest because it matches everything.
Right,
Right.
right.
I
So
gotta
sometimes
remember
do that.
something like that in the highway business area, so they can increase their nearness to the street or something based on what's in neighboring businesses.
Yeah, so business in CBD can go from 0, they do the opposite. They limit how far, like, so no, everything else has a front yard setback, then your structure. In CBD, it's your structure, and you can't go back further than 25, because anything that's out of 25 is
Okay.
non-conforming. You have to keep it between 0 to 25. So they push it. So some towns have zoning that have a front setback, or the means of a street. So if you live on a street and all the houses are pushed forward and you have a house at the back, they'll actually pull your house, a new house forward, because they want that street to look like it's just straight down rather than
Mm.
like a jigsaw back in and out.
so I guess I just wanna circle back though, so in terms of doing the flow chart, is that something we wanna kinda think about, or is that, do you know what your thought is on that, Carolyn? If they've seen anything like that in other towns, or is that?
I can't say that I have seen a flow chart or a decision tree for this particular scenario for
Yeah.
nonconformities.
And if it doesn't make sense, you know, I kind of think.
I can give it some further thought.
Yeah. think
Because,
we're
you know,
looking at make it more readable or clear,
Yeah.
more clarity, but if it doesn't do that,
It might actually work better that, you know, as Jim was saying, is your lot non-conforming? If yes, skip to the next line. If no, go down to, you know, line
Right.
10 or whatever
Right.
makes sense and take it from there
Yeah.
and maybe try that. So let me think about that.
Okay. I think it's everything on this page.
I thought I had some kind of question on 95Z or whatever. The fact that the one family or two family would not be deemed non-conforming solely due to deficiencies of area or frontage. I thought that was conflicting with one of the other aspects of this. Because if it's not considered non-conforming, it doesn't have access to anything else within this category of non-conformity, I would assume.
As I read this, it meant that if you've got a one-family or two-family dwelling, meaning the use or the structure is not gonna be deemed a non-conforming building or use solely due to the lot's deficiency in frontage. So you might be a conforming building on a non-conforming lot, meaning you comply with all of the setbacks, and you are a conforming use if the use is, you know, allowed in the zoning district,
Yeah.
but you still might be on a non-conforming lot.
So the building isn't non-conforming just because the lot is
Yeah,
non-conforming.
so right across, John, from Town Hall here on Stone Street, a lot of those two families across the way,
Yeah,
they're on undersized lots, but they're in a GR which allows multifamily and they're two family, but the lot's only, like, I think one of the lots over there is like 13,000, 12,000 square feet, which we need 20,000. So they are a non-conforming lot, but the use is allowed and it's a conforming structure as well. So we have a
it meets
lot
all
of
the
them.
It meets all the setbacks.
Yeah, we've a lot of them in town, cause our GR area is terrible in this town, it's very bad for size and where the uses are. Majority of our GR can't even, like, we go through the last time, like, I think 7% of our GR is allowed to expand into at least two families. Majority of them are single families, so we have a lot of one and two families on undersized lots.
Just a lot of existing non-conforming. You have anything else, John?
no, I come in late, I'm behind the ball on this one. Thought I had more notes.
You did have one question earlier, I think we did address it, it was on 9 to, I guess, C, dealing with variances. So Carolyn was gonna try to find a way to kind of salvage a portion of that to explain that, that since a variance is not a non-conforming situation, the way it is, I'm sorry. Would it be appropriate to state that within the zoning that a variance is not a non-conforming situation, that way it's clear to the reader / homeowner? Is there a way to simplify that, or is that language not needed? Carolyn's gonna take another look at that, because I know you brought that up last time about trying to add language there to provide that information to the homeowner. Alright, so on 9.6, non-conforming off-street parking, I think this is where we had the biggest issue, because our parking was not clear. Section 8 was not really clear on this. So you mentioned, I guess the first comment, per the diagnostic report, this section could be moved to section 8 parking, or could be moved under section 9.3. Committee to consider, my recommendation was moved to Article 8. We agreed with moving it to Article 8, however, there was an overall general confusion with the section and some of the language used. It seems overly complicated. So, I don't know if anyone remembers this one. I'm just gonna kind of move back to section 8 where we discuss non-conforming off-street parking.
I think we had, one of the questions was, off-street parking wasn't really defined. Isn't that part of the issue?
Might have been.
What was off-street parking supposed to represent? Oh, and the other one was, there was something referencing credits, yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
Credit for existing parking.
The credit
And
is
we
the
didn't
one.
see
How?
where the credit
Right.
came in on section 8.
Right,
Yeah.
there's
Yep.
no reference to it in section 8, so You usually see credits when someone is going to like bank parking for some reason, like they've got the area to build out the complete zoning compliant parking, but we don't want them to build it all out because we want more green space. You see that they might bank some spaces, or, you know, if you've got multiple tenants, maybe you'd wanna, you know, set some spaces aside, but I didn't see any benefit to crediting under the parking provision. The other thing that was a little confusing for me is just reading this, the language that's sort of highlighted in blue, where we're talking about, if a use of an existing structure or lot does not have sufficient parking, and it's changed to a different type of use with a different number of parking spaces required, but if there's no net increase in square footage or area, then the following will apply. Well, if there's a change of use, there's likely going to be a change of parking required. And one of these paragraphs actually talked about, or if there's no parking, well, if there's no parking with the existing use and we change the use, there's still gonna be no parking with the new use. So how are we squaring that? You know, I imagine that some of the places that have no parking might be more like in your, you know, your central business, like, you know, downtown areas, so to speak, where the way to deal with that might be to actually eliminate or reduce parking so that they are much more dependent upon on-street parking spaces. But I don't know how we're going to require just a change in use to suddenly comply with parking if it doesn't comply with parking as is, unless they're going to lop off a wing of the building somehow and create parking.
Yeah, we get a lot, because again, I think there is a section in the section 8, chapter 8, that allows, we go 1 to 6 for our parking, and number 6 is, it defers back to the building department, and I think we use that exception a lot, because to your point, if someone comes with a new building and goes before the zoning or the planning board for site plan, most people build a shell. They don't have a tenant yet, or they build multiple bays.
Yeah.
So you have to give a parking diagnosis, and you say, well, it's going to be for storage, which is one per say 500 up to 1 per 1,000. But then someone comes in going, okay, I'm going to open the gym, and the parking is completely changed.
Right.
We can't. I've always said, we can't lock in a number at the beginning when you don't know what the sole purpose of a building is.
Right.
So we have to find that area that says, okay, if the use changes, can you crucify a business by not having all the parking?
Right.
And that's why I want to find a...
So is it simpler to just get rid of that language under subparagraph 1, and we're then left with, if the use of an existing structure or lot doesn't have sufficient parking, and it changes to a different use with a different parking requirement, they have to comply with the parking requirements for those new use or uses, or further down, I think we do talk about that there could be a special permit that's granted to reduce it. You know, maybe that would be the better way to go, when you actually know what the use is that's going in.
Yeah.
Or if it's a shared parking situation, you know, where, you know, you've got a day use and an evening use, and maybe they can share the space. And maybe all of this might make a little more sense if we lift it and put it into 8 and start fooling around with parking and focusing on that a little bit more.
Yeah. And that kind of it complicates it too, right? We already have some sections we need to address within section 6.
Right.
Now we move this, it's like, well, do we take it off, and now it's hanging out there until we eventually do section 8? And I don't know the best way of doing that other than to also include section 8, but then we're now getting ahead of ourselves too much.
Well, we're not getting too far ahead of ourselves, because we've got a June 30th deadline.
No,
right?
I guess I'm thinking of town meeting wise.
No, you're right, you can't, you're right, you
June
can't.
30th for the grant, or for the...
Yes,
yeah, for the,
but you're absolutely right. Now you're thinking of, we were trying to address this in like smaller pieces for town meeting, but you're right. If we're now going to make this change here in 9, 8 and 9 are going to have to go together.
Yeah.
Or, you know,
I think we should move this, especially the parking, strictly to A, it'll make things a lot cleaner.
Yeah.
And again, non-conforming off-street parking, again, to John's point, there's no real proper definition in our town on it. Since I've been here, no one's ever come to me for off-street parking, no one's ever come for a non-conforming of off-street parking. I think it's one of those things we might have had previously in the town. I don't think we have it, not to the best of my knowledge, I can think of any building or use that.
Well, wasn't there something for one of the new buildings down in the center here where some of their parking was at another site down the street or something?
No, so they reduced, 95 West went for a waiver to reduce the parking, but they have the lot that's right across the road from them, that they came into agreement with the previous owners who owned 100 Elm and said, we're going to rent some of our spots off of you for extra, to have extra. And that's what they done, was to put it over there, some of the parking, but they met their, and because it
So
was,
they met the requirement, they just.
yeah, they got a waiver to
Extra.
reduce it.
Okay.
I think that the confusion too was 95 West who bought it off of, I can't remember the owner, Marion, he still owns Elm Street, that family, the family owned it.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember the name, sorry, but they went for the same time when they sold their piece of property for 95 West. They had the parking lot that's under the bridge going down Elm Street that they use for MBTA parking, and they had the lot that was done across the way. So at the same time they were kind of running parallel to each other, and part of it was 95 West, I believe, got their parking reduced to like 1.25 or 3.5, but they also had an agreement with the owners of the parking lot across the way to take some of their spots as extras, and they could rent them out, they were going to be held to rent out to their tenants if they needed them.
So overall, moving this to section 8, I think that's kind of where we need to, I guess, put a pin in it,
I
right?
think
Right.
And
204 did the same thing, before they rezoned that to CBD down there.
Yeah.
They rented space
From
from
St.
the
Mary's.
the car repair garage of the,
Oh,
body shop across the
DNA
street.
Body. Yeah,
but then when it became CBD down there, then you didn't have to do that.
yeah, they got dependency.
I was just going back to where, credit, where it says credit.
Yes.
What if if an applicant is seeking to use existing parking spaces, he's not looking for credit for anything, he just wants to use those spaces, right?
Mhm.
So, would that make sense? Because usually when you're thinking of credits, it's something that they can earn to get something else, right?
Yeah, I can.
And that's what it seems like they wanna do, is they wanna use the existing parking, but they have to have an engineer provide them with the plan, right? So,
So yeah, the credit, I've looked back, I haven't found anything yet why that was allowed, I still haven't figured out what the credit led to or gave you. Cause like we have one here, the car storage on Route 1, like they're a warehouse, they have 3 people working there, the most they said they'll ever have is on site is 5. They required like 25 parking spaces, so they had to give us 25. They could have asked for a waiver and they didn't bother. I think that's where a credit would come in handy there, going, we're showing that we don't need the parking even though it's required, we'll give the credit and we'll just get green space and just reduce the parking. And you could leave that credit there, going that if the use ever changed, then they would have to create, that the credit goes away, they get those 25 back.
Alright.
Well, we can revisit this in section 8.
Yeah, I guess that's the best way to look at it
Maybe it'll
right now.
all be clear as day when we're talking
Yeah.
about parking.
don't
Yeah.
comment.
9.7 repair and reconstruction. So the question they had was, unless new structures be reconstructed in the same footprint as the destroyed structure, or is the goal to ensure that the new structure is more compliant with zoning where possible? And it's like, we require the homeowner to make their homeowner compliant with current zoning, or do they retain the right to rebuild the non-conforming structure or building in the same non-conforming footprint? Ideally, we'd like to see the structure or building rebuilt more in conformance with current zoning. So, I guess to answer the question is, well,
Yeah, I think if it's, if it's an involuntary destruction, natural disaster or something like that,
yeah,
then the single or two-family is allowed to reconstruct in the prior footprint. The question really becomes, what if it is a voluntary demolition?
That's
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
I'll bet they're off of that one, I think.
You know,
Yeah.
then,
if they voluntarily take it down, they have no fallback.
within a certain period of time, I mean,
Yeah.
that was more of a question of like, have you dealt with this situation, or how has it, but maybe you don't
Yeah.
want to, shine a bright light
I know.
on voluntary
Yeah.
demolition, but, like, I've seen some bylaws where they're cute about it, that as long as one wall is left standing,
Yeah,
then the whole structure can be rebuilt, and you think, come on, I can go up to that one wall and go, and it's going right over,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sudbury have that law, we use that perfectly, there was a house in Sudbury that's got a double wall in the front, cause we built a whole new wall and left the existing wall inside in the building, just to use that loophole. So I think, if it's involuntary due to either a storm or went on fire and someone lost their house, and they want to rebuild it, you have they're allowed to go back with the exact same non-conformity. Same, being honest, if they decide to say if it's just an old house and they go, hey, they'll come back and go, it's structurally unsafe, we're going to knock it. It's going to be a tough sell to say no, you have to move it back and make it conforming, because one that took it down, the protection on 1 or 2 family would protect them to go back in the exact same footprint. You could ask them, but to a degree, as they say, if they took the house down and their septic system is brand new and it's all here, and you go, well, you knocked the house and we want you to move the house, by the way, you're going to have to dig your septic up to make it move. That's to me, in my head thinking, I can't see that being a easy push to make someone, because again, 1 and 2 family are so well protected in this state. You'd be asking them, would they not like to make it conforming? They could say, go away and just put it back exactly, and there's not much. Even if we did right in our zoning, that's an easy win, I think, again. And I get your point, trying to make it all nice and conforming, but you'd have to rely on the owner to work with you rather than say, because you knocked it down, you have to put it back there. That is tough.
And don't get me wrong, I'm fine with the language staying as is and not, like I said, shining a big bright light on. But if you knock it down voluntarily, here's the new rule that applies. But that's exactly my concern, is that it then puts it all on you to be arguing with the homeowner about, well, it was infested with termites, and well, my septic system is there and I can't move the house further back now. So I'm not looking to cause problems for you. It's just a question.
Exactly.
But we can leave that language as you, with a couple of edits right there,
Okay.
and that should be fine.
All right.
So you're just looking to remove destruction out of there and just the damage?
Yes.
Because real briefly, I tried to do it, but I think I explained to them, on the last meetings, we had a lot on Bullitt Street, and it was, I think the frontage was non-conforming, but it was 600 feet back to the water. And this guy bought the property and he wanted to build the house back on the water. But he went in and knocked the building down first. And then he came into the planning board and stuff. And so then they decided they're gonna try to make a 2-lot subdivision with 1 lot non-buildable. And it did get approved, we approved it. But then the neighbor was upset that he wanted to buy it, and I guess this guy bought it from under him. So he gets a lawsuit, and then they had the lawsuit, and then the guy just said forget it, and he built a little ranch house on the footprint. House isn't even as big as the original one, but he built it on the original footprint, and he was okay. So, but that was a voluntary damage,
Yeah. Demolition.
destruction.
Yeah.
So, he paid the price. I mean, to me, the house would have been, I think we could have approved 1 house, which was gonna be, but it wasn't, it was a 2-lot subdivision instead. But it would have been a much better setting if the house was back near the water, I mean, 600 feet, you wouldn't even see it from the street, really.
Guess if the fire trucks can get back there, well,
All right, so
okay,
we're good with this section, or we?
Yeah.
We gonna change?
okay.
All right. Got those comments. We go to section 5. So,
They just have to run in the clerk's office.
Yeah.
It's open, right?
yeah. So, Carolyn, I guess I'd ask you before we get into this one, we had some comments too within the table of use, there are the things that you kind of raised within the use table itself. Do we wanna address all that now, or do we wanna kind of just address the other aspects of section 5? I'm not sure if that's, what everyone's thoughts on that are.
Yeah, my thoughts will be the other sections, cause there actually are a lot and they're pretty strenuous.
Yep.
The use table, I think we can wait it to go through the use table and then through section, the rest of section 5, B, C, D, and E
Yeah.
is a lot.
And you might wanna give some serious thought to how much you wanna tinker with the use table and the
Yeah.
dimensional table, because the two things that will, evoke the most controversy or comment at town meeting is going to be, this use is no longer gonna be allowed, or I'm not gonna be allowed to do this with my property, or you're now gonna render me non-conforming, or now I'm gonna have more land that I possibly can, and, or setbacks. Nothing upsets people more than
Yeah.
changing those things, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna completely defer to you folks. I mean, there were a couple of things, like you said, Patrick, like there are some things that, it's a use table, but then we go into, but if you can connect to septic and you have a minimum lot size of, and if we've got more than 3 families living in, well, now we're kind of getting to something that's a little different than just
Yeah.
your standard use table, which should be category zoning districts allowed, not
Way too
allowed.
many sections where it's like, but then this and this, and I think the big one is like multifamily, I think it's,
Yes,
I mean,
it goes on and on,
You're
yes.
saying it shouldn't be in the use table?
It should not be in the use
Yeah.
table, because that's not, my rule of thumb is, your use table should be a pretty simple
Right, right,
use table,
yeah.
like when you were envisioning, a decision tree or a chart or whatever, you should just be able to pull out your chart and say, I've got an automobile dealership, this is the zoning
Right.
district I'm in, and here's whether it's allowed. If you start getting into all this other stuff,
Yeah, you really have to read it carefully, because
you
it may
do,
the first use may not, but then you get a sub-use, and you
Right.
call it, I guess,
right.
yeah,
If you've got enough to break this down into a couple of little
yeah.
headings here, then put it into a separate section.
Yeah.
We can always put a footnote that says, see section 5.2, whatever it winds up being, and get into the more detail about it there, like you do with earth removal
Yeah.
and mining,
That makes sense, yeah.
But, I don't know, I think the use table should be simpler.
Yeah.
The other
Yeah.
thing is, anything that I highlighted was, just for your consideration of, anything highlighted as an accessory use, you might wanna consider having a principal use table and then an accessory use table separately. You don't have to do that, but, I see that becoming a little more popular, and especially now that we're all talking about accessory dwelling units, more and more people are looking for an accessory use table. It might work, you might take a look at it and say, no, we're gonna keep it like this, and like I said, this is your bylaw, this is not my bylaw. So, no offense will be taken if you decide you wanna keep it this way, but it was just a thought, that if part of the goal here is simplicity, clarifying, and making it a little more user-friendly, that might be one way to do it.
Yeah, I'm all for that in terms of just making it obviously easier to read, and I think, do you have any other examples of towns that may have that, that we could take a look at?
Accessory use table?
Yeah,
Wayland is one that comes to mind.
okay. I guess I'd like to see it too.
I was gonna say Medway might as well. But definitely Wayland, they do their tables and, they do separate out the two,
Alright,
so that might be a good guide.
I guess, that for me, I obviously, easy, I would like it to be easier to read and clear to read, but I think I'd probably want to see how another town has that set up too,
Right.
just to kind of see how it looks.
Yep.
There are definitely portions of this, besides obviously like, the multifamily one, and then, we got one of the whole, this one's always, I just thought was just the weirdest thing ever, which is the whole, any of the following uses in a business district located on lots where an overall length of at least 1,000 feet of frontage, and then one for under 1,000 feet of frontage, like, I don't understand what the purpose of wording it that like that. I think it's like the worst way to.
And
It
I
just
think that's
doesn't-
the one that I said, we're talking about frontage here, right? It's 1,000 feet along a
It
linear
should just be, do you want a
street.
bowling alley or not? Is it allowed by? Yeah,
Right.
We're starting on five.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so we're just talking about, so there's obviously there's a breakdown of changes both within table 5 and the use table, and I think right now most of the focus is just on the other portions of section 5 without going too far into the weeds of the use table itself. But Karen was mentioning that it may be a good idea to look into whether we wanna have both the principal use table and then a separate accessory use table as a way to kind of just make it a little clearer, just improve the readability.
Yeah. One or two new uses, because
Mhm.
we got some.
I mean, you know, when you look at just the highlighting alone, there's a fair number of things that I would
Mhm.
consider to be just accessory uses.
Yeah.
So, you know, it wouldn't be an insignificant table. And then even looking at some of the uses and whether some can be combined or collapsed or whatever. Again, I will defer entirely to you folks on that, because you can read the room better than I can.
Well, like some of the language too, this is more of a, some of it's pretty outdated language in some areas. I think about like the home occupancy, there's
Mhm.
one in particular where it's like, I don't know if there's a, almost like, maybe it's easier to update that, or just easier to take a look at an example of newer zoning and see how they have it listed for like home occupancy and just go with that language. You know, with the whole breakdown with like, you know, cabinet maker, skate sharpener, like those are just,
Right.
we're in the weird specifics where I feel like it might not make sense to go into that.
Right,
Yeah.
it might just be easier, again, if it becomes an accessory use table, just a catch-all category of home occupation. And, you know, if we really feel the need to include some language that, again, accessory by definition is supposed to be customary and incidental. You know, if somebody were to say, well, I manufacture sneakers in my basement. No, is that really a home occupation as opposed to, you know, someone who's, a tailor, right?
Yeah,
You know, there's still some discretion there.
Like, I think in that you could clean up pretty easy, because you have the use table that's allowed as of right.
Mm-hmm.
Dentist, obviously, doctor, clergyman, that's all as of right. When you go to the use table for other businesses, you could just shorten it down to basically any other business not named in J is a special permit, and let them present, so that way you're covering all home businesses.
Right.
Any new, old, whatever, it covers them all. We have our section that says these are allowed as of right. Anything else is a special permit, rather than giving a whole list of them. You can still keep the sub-paragraphs of you parking, people coming to your house, but that'd be all clarified in the special permit. But instead of having the whole paragraph of listing different jobs, just say all uses in the dwelling of a building accessory to the primary, that's not mentioned in table J, is a special permit, so you don't have to list
yeah, let's
all these
like
things
that.
up, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some that I think may be controversial to touch, but like some of them like that, I feel like just could look into adjusting it now. Like the other one, like I said, the whole 1,000-foot frontage thing, I think is
But it makes that,
oddly worded and
yeah.
doesn't really impact anything other than the mall, so.
and they don't even like, it
Yeah,
goes
but-
over 1,000 special permit, under 1,000 special permit. Why don't you just say 1,000 special permit?
I just make it the use, and if you want
Yeah.
the use, it's allowed in the district, why do I need to have,
Yeah,
you know,
1,000 feet.
if I just have the frontage for, property in the highway business, you know?
Part of it's, do you want requirements for a Walmart to be different than a mom and pop? Because they're both got the same, just basic idea of a convenience type store. But one's 10 times the size of the other. So sometimes the amount of frontage does make a difference.
has there been any, determination about short-term rentals in town?
We only have it prohibited within the ADU, we haven't had its own separate bylaw.
Okay, so I was gonna say, you know, you've got bed and breakfast or a tourist home as a use that's listed here, and it's allowed by special permit in some districts,
Oh,
or allowed in B. You know, that like, talking about like updating some of the language. I know that everyone uses the term tourist home, but maybe we should talk about
that's
short-term rentals.
yeah.
Mhm.
And how do we wanna, if we wanna regulate that, if we wanna do that, do we wanna have it as its own separate section like other
Mhm.
communities have? I think that
Right.
might be-
And we could do that by definition, that short-term rental is as defined in chapter 94G,
Yeah,
and it does not include a bed and breakfast, just so that we could differentiate between the two.
Which one are we looking at?
It's, H,
Bed breakfast, okay.
yeah,
Yes.
under residential.
So Carolyn, that's a question I had too, was, like in Walpole, if you went on a multifamily, you have to be connected to the public sewer.
Mhm.
So could that restriction be,
In
with
the use
ADU
table
with the-
itself?
Yeah, but with the ADU. I mean, because if you look at all of these here, I mean, this one here says it has to be connected to the public sewer,
Right,
which is bed and breakfast, and then if you look back in the residential where it says 1 and 2 family, and it's B and C, 3B and C,
yep,
they have to be connected to the town sewer. right?
I think, what did we say, I've got the ADU draft here,
So I think, do we put that in there, but I also think that the
What'd you
water
say?
and sewer one is separate connection.
Yeah, so water and sewer, Rick Mattson said, if the standalone ADU, he wants a separate water and sewer connection. And under 760 CMR 71, it says if it's, you don't need separate connection if it's not required by the municipality, the utilities, local zoning or county law. So it's kind of they left it wide open, so if the
Right.
municipality requires, which Rick does, and it's in water and sewer, that if you have a second structure on a lot, it has to have an independent sewer and
Right.
water connection. So again, that's what we defer, as I try to explain to you sometimes, is we can't put everything in our zoning, or we're using a wheelbarrow to bring the books in, because we use other laws. So with our ADUs, the water and sewer, we defer to them, so they said, yeah, it needs to be connected. 760 CMR backs it up by saying if the municipality requires it, we're allowed to do it. Fire department actually have, if you're within 25 feet of the road, you need 10-foot wide access to the ADU. So we have some skinny houses that come in asking. If you're over 50 feet, you need a 25-foot road access to the ADU, because under NFPA 527 states that if you have a structure behind another structure, the fire have to have access, and that's their thing. So we can use, even though it's not in our ADU, we're doing up a pamphlet at the moment with all these footnotes. So if they want exemption for that part of it, they have to go either to fire or to the water and sewer committee and get exemption from them, because they do require this part. So it's like the ADU is, so again, the ADU is the use, we're doing the zoning side of it, then there's the building code, fire code. So like you attach an ADU to a house, it looks like a regular structure. We define that as a 2-family under building code. You're fire rating that wall between the ADU and the house. No ifs, ands or buts, because the use is allowed, but building code says you're separating them with a firewall. So that's where building code, but it's not in ours, because again, we can use the building code to back it up. We'll use the sewer and water committee, said no, we want separate connections. We defer to them because that's what they are actually, and the requirements in the town state that as well. So we can use that.
So it's also not a rule that we're making up just for the ADUs, it's been on the books forever, you know, that the two
Yeah.
families, multi-families have to have the sewer, so we should be able to do it. Now,
Yeah.
I know, just real quick, I know they have their own light department, and they will only bring one line into a house from the street. So what they would actually have to do there, if they had a detached building, they would actually have to put 2 meters on, say, the principal dwelling, and then maybe go underground to the ADU.
Yeah.
But they won't bring in two lines from the street
Yeah.
to one lot.
Yeah, so that's where state law differs to the municipality on that, so that's why if someone says, I want my own separate, you can go, municipality doesn't allow it, you're getting it this way or you're not getting it. And to your point on this, the reason it does state under this is if connected to sewer at the time, the reason being, if you go back to chapter 11, it does state chapter 11, if you're in a water resource recharge area, if you're not connected to town's sewer, you need double the lot, you need 80,000 square feet to
Right.
build a house, so that's where this says, so these requirements here, if you're looking, are if you're not connected to town sewer. Because if you are connected, if you have your own septic system, then chapter 11, jumps in with it and backs it up to say, now you need double the lot size because you're in an area 1, 2, 3 or 4 recharge.
A question came to me about a week or so ago when I was talking to somebody about the ADU. Can they be sold as like condos separately? Or does it have to be under the principal owner?
So,
That-
there,
I couldn't answer
no,
that.
and I
Ask
don't,
the
I'm not
secretary.
laughing to be, smart or anything like that, it is kind of like the $64,000 question hanging out there.
Yeah.
There are, some attorneys across the state, one of whom happens to be one of my former colleagues, who has been saying
Yes.
on a webinar that I'm sure you were probably on with a bunch of building inspectors saying, yes, they can be turned into
Yeah.
condos. And, Jonathan Silverstein.
Or
Silverstein.
Yes.
Tillman was doing it as well.
I can't tell you the words we had with him about what are you saying, and he's
Yeah.
like, well, I'm happy to come over and explain it and, have a conversation about it. He's like, no, there's nothing to explain. So we've had some back and forth with the Attorney General's office about it, because at first, the Attorney General, said, well, they were kind of agreeing with this condo concept. And we fought back and said, it's an accessory dwelling unit.
Mhm.
If they are separately owned, what is that? I said, then they're just 2 units. I said, there's nothing accessory to the other. So the AG did come back and say, yeah, I'm kind of agreeing with you folks now, that their suggestion was to re-emphasize that they have to be on the same lot, that the ADU has to be, subordinate to the principal
Right.
dwelling. But she's kind of shying away from, and I understand why. Zoning regulates the use of land, it doesn't regulate ownership. So she wants to sort of stay away from clearly coming down one way or the other on the ownership issue. And I said, well, okay, could the 2 units be separately owned, but they have to be on the same lot? So that, we think of condos, usually larger developments, right? Where we then have common area and
HOA or
common,
something.
exactly, in an HOA, I don't know if you wanna go through the trouble of that for, say, 2 units. But, I think that becomes more problematic than it's worth for just 2 units. So I've been recommending, put all that language in, it has to be on the same lot as the principal dwelling, that,
Same ownership?
I think I've even got one out there that
Put
might
that
be
in there?
pending, well, like I said, they will likely strike ownership if we put it in the bylaw.
Hmm.
But I'm pretty sure that there is one pending with them right now, that, I think the town of Cohasset, they amended their ADU bylaw in December. They didn't wanna wait for the regulations to come out. So, they amended the bylaw, and we kind of knew at the time, some of this might get struck down, but if you wanna find out, early, we'll find out. So, the AG has not yet returned that bylaw to
So
us.
we should get all the other towns to put in single ownership and we do it and then we have enough of them, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's a fair number of them that are putting some language in there to that effect, and I think even Patrick, when you and I have talked, I've said, put it in there. What's the worst that happens, that they strike paragraph C? Oh, well, the rest of your bylaw still stands, even if they decide to strike it, but,
I know there's one thing that with like the setbacks, right, because they don't really regulate the dimensions as much. I know we have in there having the setbacks reference to the
Mhm.
principal as opposed to an accessory structure, but then our own bylaw indicates, or we have it defined as accessory structure.
Yeah,
Structure
no living.
Right.
can't have a living quarter, so.
can't be
Yeah.
habitable, right?
Yeah, so we can play that game.
Yeah.
But Ted's point on the condo, I've been asked that by a few people, we've said straight out, no, you can't. The grounds we're standing on is, if you own the principal house and Caroline buys the ADU off you and condos it, she's not secondary tier primary, she's a standalone. Now you've made a two-family.
It's not an ADU.
Now it's an
Not an
ADU, to me,
ADU.
that's, in zoning, that's a two-family, now that's a violation, we just hit you with every violation on the book to one of you caves. So I don't believe, even though I was on that webinar, I knew it was in tears over it.
So could this go to case law at some point?
It probably will.
Yeah. So it's just,
Have you guys ever dealt with Amy Quessel from my
Oh.
office too? So we were at the MMLA when HLC decided that day to issue their final regulations. And Christine Clutchman, the head of HLC, came by to talk to us about the regulations. And in Amy's words, I got salty with her. I said, well, it's infuriating. It's like, you are going to make this more difficult for municipalities than you want it to be. And you push all the blame back on us, that, you know, we're the bad guys, that we don't want to be cooperative and we don't want to create, you know, flexible and affordable, attainable housing for people. It's like, no, you just come up with these rules and you don't think about the repercussions of the rules. So, yeah, we're a little bit ticked off. And she said, well, then I guess we'll just see you in court. I said, I won't see you in court, Christine. I said, I'm gonna see, you know, Jane and Joe Smith, who are the homeowners who wanna put that ADU in court. But
Yeah.
and it wasn't because we submitted, I don't know, 5 pages worth of comments on the ADU regulations, specifically asking them, clarify this, take care of that. They refused to do any of it. I'm like,
Like they're having a fight
they
right
changed the definition of a bus stop. That was about all they gave us. Like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
so
You
does
know.
the AG have legal right then to decide all these things? Is that?
So our bylaws as a town, after town meeting approves them, they have to go into the Attorney General's office
Yeah.
where they review them for consistency with state
State
law,
law.
and they can strike
But they're the ones who
anything.
interpret that.
That's right.
There's no
That's right.
appealing of that, or?
You can appeal.
Oh.
Doesn't happen very often, and
Does that go to land
So-
court? or-
it could be Superior Court, usually Superior Court. But it's a little bit of an uphill battle because the AG is usually pretty comprehensive in these things. And
Yeah, sure.
there aren't very many Superior Court judges that wanna strike down the AG, except for lately.
Yeah, and I
MBTs
think
and
honestly,
MBT.
I think that's why they won't give you a definitive answer on condo, because if they do, I firmly believe KP Law could defend us
Mhm.
easily against AG, and they're, my opinion, they're a bully. They're not going to pick a fight they're going to lose. So that's why they won't give us. That's why there was so many questions that KP and a lot of towns sent in for an answer, and the AG just like sent out that new regulation that day because I went over that day, and then I was asked to leave. I set them off because I asked them so many questions, they went nuts. But that was it. They don't want to answer you because if they have to put their foot down, they have to back it up, and they can't back it up. They don't want to go to court and lose. So the AG is, again, I don't know if you've seen the down the Cape with the protected beachfront on the Cape that the Kennedys brought in years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They're in fight with the Lieutenant Governor right now because they're saying you can't put an ADU on the protected beachfront with
Yes.
a sewer system, water, everything going on land that no one can even, you can't even dig for stuff on the beach. That's how restrictive it is. But the Lieutenant Governor's like, I don't see a problem with putting an ADU in the middle of the beach. That's the
But
level.
even with that, for example, Truro in the
Yeah.
National Seashore says, oh, we've allowed ADUs in
Yeah.
the seashore for years, no big deal. Wellfleet, dead set against them.
Yeah.
So what are we gonna do here? So
Yeah.
what is Wellfleet doing on their town meeting? Petitioning the general court to amend that provision so that there will be no ADUs in the
ADU
National
buildings, yeah.
Seashore. But where was the National Seashore when this was pending before the legislature? You know, they wait until it's final and say,
Yeah.
oh, gee, you can't do this, but.
Well, I think the legislators doing the same thing with the MBTA zoning and the ADUs. They're waiting for the towns to come up with language to see where they messed up and they can close any loopholes,
Mhm.
you know, when they, right? Because it seems like they just threw out partial restrictions until we all come, you know, to pass it.
Yeah.
Or we come up with something and then they say, oh, there's a loophole we gotta close, and then they'll change the law, so.
Yeah.
Right.
Because honestly, with zone, that's why I always said at the beginning, I always think of from the zoning enforcement side point of view and from a developer's point of view. because they're the best people to get a loophole in the zoning law, because as soon as they get there, like, how do I get around this? And I'll defer back to the previous time I worked in, we had an FAR. They wrote in a zoning because one neighbour didn't like that his neighbour finished his basement. Don't know why, because no one ever knows what's in someone's basement. They changed the FAR in Brookline to 100% of your living area, but by doing so, they opened the back door to all the pre-existing homes that were there that could go 150, 200% above. And we literally had one developer that walked in the next day he had sold one house for $6 million that day, came in the next day and applied to finish the complete basement at 220% of the house. He knew the back door was there. He used it, sold the house on 2 months later for 10 million. And he started just changing all these houses, because developers are the best people. If you want, you mightn't like them, but they know how to get around zoning laws. So that's why when you're thinking this, I always think back in my head, if I'm going to a town I want to build, how the hell do I beat this?
You know, the developers along with the engineers, they team up. And
Oh
they-
yeah,
Yeah.
it's money to them. Like it's
Oh, yeah.
they will find your loopholes pretty quick.
But, alright, so taking away from this,
Yeah.
I know. It's like every meeting we just, I'm like, oh, we gotta get back.
We can go on these tangents.
So just one thing to reference for everybody, so one thing Carolyn noted too is the formatting for this. 5 and 6 is where we start to kind of like all of a sudden add in, you know,
A's,
letters.
B's, and
Yeah,
other things,
yeah.
yes, yep.
So striking that to be consistent with every other section where it goes, you know,
So are we
another
thinking,
letter.
are we, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but are you thinking that this is gonna be a repeal and replace? Because if it's a repeal and replace, we can easily change all of the numbering. If it's just amend as, you know, by insertions that are underlined and deleting anything that's struck through, it's going to get to be a little difficult to read when we're
Yeah,
crossing out every little letter of the
it's gonna
alphabet.
have, so after this past town meeting, initially we wanna do strike through and have it be is like, alright, here's where the new stuff's added, here's where stuff's taken out. And then just from the standpoint of putting it on a warrant, it was like, you know, you had to get a magnifying glass to decipher it. So I think
Right.
repeal replace makes sense as long as we provide people the information of where they can see every single change, and
Mhm.
we do that. I think for the town meeting packet, I have like a QR code and a link to our webpage where I have everything already shown, so repeal in place is just,
It's cleaner.
it's cleaner, and for a town meeting member just to kind of see it, it's.
So that's repeating the whole bylaw, not just one section.
Well, when you change
Okay,
it,
we
just say repeal in place rather than like
You can repeal
strike through.
sections.
Right, we can repeal and just repeal section
Sections,
five,
okay.
replace it with a whole new section
Section.
5, so that we aren't
Okay, yeah.
seeing all these cross
Yeah,
throughs,
that makes
especially
sense.
It becomes
since
problematic.
sometimes, like for example, if I crossed out all of these A's, for
Yeah.
example, in the use table,
Yeah,
you wouldn't even notice that I've
Yeah.
crossed out an A.
right.
Yeah, cause
It just doesn't show up, so it's
Yeah.
a little frustrating to folks.
yeah.
Yeah, no, but people will ask for the so-called red line.
The red line, yep.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess that makes sense, every other little change makes sense in terms of just what you crossed off here. I like the idea of doing an accessory table along with a principal, but I'm gonna take a look at Wayland's as well, and then I can send that to everybody,
Mhm.
understanding what that is.
I think if it makes it more readable and understandable, it's a good thing to do.
I think so, and then,
Break it up into-
Would it, but I guess it's just a question for everyone here, would it make sense, do we wanna take a look at where are areas within the use table that kinda stand out to you as something that maybe Carolyn can take a closer look at and see if the language.
Multifamily.
Oh, yeah, the
Okay.
way it's written, like in terms of all the breakouts, right, where it's like, it's allowed by right, but then you need this,
In
and
its
this, and this,
interaction
and
with
this.
6C4A.
Um,
Unless we can only be right now, get rid of 6C4A.
You can't,
Yes, you can.
not without changing 5. Because if you go to the 1 and 2 family, it goes on detached single 1 family, 2 family detached, 3 family detached. And then dwellings for
Dwelling, which should.
dwelling
dwelling
to
or
occupancy by
dwellings.
more, 3 or more families. So if you go with our definitions, multi-families are a building with multiple families. We don't have one that has 10 single families in a lot. That's what section C4 was designed for.
So we
If
wanna
we
get
take
rid of
that
it,
out,
so that doesn't happen anymore.
yeah, you can't tell people, if they've, that's what GR is for. GR is for multiple, not just multiple single families, it's multiple buildings as well.
No, it doesn't say that, it's for multifamily, doesn't say it allows multiple buildings. That's nothing.
That's what
to do with that.
64 is.
64.
64A, yeah.
Yes,
That's why I'm saying, go away.
yeah, that's it, but that's, you take that out, then all you can do then is either a 1, a 2 family, 3 family, you're putting
Or a big apartment.
apartment complex.
Yes,
So take, obviously the one that's going on Brook Lane right now, 15 houses.
yes.
You take them away, you
Yes.
put a 3-story building in the middle of a single family neighbourhood
That's
around
allowed.
it. That's,
That's allowed.
But if you have the
The
roof.
way they've done it now is
if you take 6 feet out,
bending
that
every
you lose
great,
that.
every rule there is.
But if you take
still need
6
to
feet out of
well, this
it,
goes back to that, this is a whole different thing, because I think that,
Yes,
honestly, I think section, so multifamily, that whole subsection, I think it should be completely looked at entirely, because I think the requirements are absolutely ridiculous.
oh yeah.
But that's besides the point. I think if you're tying that to 64A, I'm just going, if you kept it as is right now, it still has the same square footage requirement per dwelling unit, right? So you need that 10,000 square feet per dwelling unit. So if I have the space for it and I want to have, 3 single-family homes, because I have 30,000 square feet, what's to prevent me from doing that instead of just doing one singular?
right.
I mean, granted,
If they
it
have
saves
30
more, it's better from the standpoint if you have less impervious, but,
Yeah.
But
But if we take 6C4 completely out of it,
yeah.
then again, you can go to, say, granted, Alexandria was a subdivision, but pretend it's a GR right beside the middle school. If you take 6 4 out of it, the only thing that can go there is 4, 3, 4, 5. Take one of the big buildings from downtown and plop it right in the residential neighbourhood. That's all be allowed there. That's an absolute insanity. I'd rather have 15
That's
single
why they
family
don't
homes in my
do it.
neighbour
I think it's
than a
trying to think of
4-story
different
building.
building styles though, John, so I think it's like, so if you're allowed, alright, we have a condo, or a condo's a 2-family, a 1-family, a 3-family, a triple decker, if you wanna think of it like that. But if you have the land area for it and you are having, multiple single families, and if that's allowed, is that a different building style, a different housing style for people to choose?
It really is the trend right now, is standalone condos now.
Yeah. Like take Pennington Crossing on East Street. I guarantee if you went to those neighbours today and said, we're putting in 40 homes there, and it's gonna be 40 individual single family homes, they would prefer that than a 4-story building. I personally would, I think all of them would, it'd skin us alive if we said, no, you're putting a 4-story building there. Renmar is doing, granted it's an AQV, but on the same principle, that's all 100 single family homes, or putting a 6-story monstrosity just welded in the middle of it, surrounded by single family homes.
And the Red Mars
Yeah.
away from everything else, there's nothing near it.
I would say there's certain situations where it's come up where I think people are thinking of certain
Summer Street.
developers or certain,
Summer Street, like, everybody was
yeah.
fine with the townhouses and the single family homes,
Mhm.
they were mad over the 3 massive buildings. They would prefer all single family homes or townhouses,
Yeah.
and didn't want 3 5-story buildings.
Yeah.
If we take 6C4 out of it, that's all you're getting is 5 6-story buildings.
Mhm.
It's true.
So that developer, Renmar up in the quarry up there, they're all single.
That's a little
standalone.
different.
Well, that's just an example, that's an AQV.
Right,
But
okay, but,
if say if it was GR,
but that guy built the same thing down in Weymouth
mhm,
with the little 9-hole golf course
Yeah.
down there, and I'm telling you, it's a gorgeous place, I mean,
That's the weather vane, right?
huh?
Weather.
Weather vane,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
It's
Very nice.
really a nice place,
Mhm.
so I'm hoping that this will be something like that, you know?
mhm.
They've certainly taken the time to work at it, yeah.
In 6C4A, and Carolyn, we're just kind of talking random nonsense right here, but that's a whole provision where you have more than one principal, like,
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I know when they first started going that way, town council, most towns don't even have this. I'm not sure if that's still the situation now, but it's not something that's everywhere.
No.
Some person, some developer found it and still storing mobile.
Well, a developer didn't put it in there, we put it in there at some point,
Right.
decades ago.
Some, it got in there for some reason,
Yeah.
but when it got pointed out to the developers, the mobile's changed.
Yeah, well, I guarantee a developer, certain developers will come to town because if they will prefer to put a 4-story building on a lot, it's gonna be a lot cheaper than doing, it'd be cheaper for me to build a 5-story building with 50 units than 50 single family homes. And I can
So-
wedge it on I can put that right up against, because again, if we're going to setbacks in the GR, I need 10 feet off the sideline.
True.
So I'm going to put a 6-story building 10 feet off my neighbour, they'll never see the sunlight again. But if I do 50 single family homes, it's going to be a lot cleaner. I think we need, not quite 6C4, but we need to combine the Patrick Fine.
I
We
mean,
need to combine it with them.
a
Somehow
way to combine it with them, or just,
clear it up better.
yeah, address the issues
Well,
that
I
you
think
have,
we-
John, but also try to find a way to make it more.
And the setbacks, there has to be an issue with that too.
the
Why
setbacks
should you
be-
have single family, 40 units, and not have a buffer against the 40 units?
Well, the way it is, it's in right now, it has a buffer. You're talking about the
No
50.
one pays attention to that.
But you're talking about
You're mixing
one,
you're mixing
so
two.
the multi-family building is different than the
Multi-family.
multiple dwelling units on a lot. If we define multi-family
So,
building
yeah.
as such, that's.
If you go to
structure.
if you go to our definitions, chapter 14, multi-family and multiple single family are two different definitions. A multi-family is multiple units in one structure. Multiple single family or single, it's like almost like a subdivision.
Yeah,
And that's in our definitions. And that's where a lot of people do come into us and get that mixed up, and they get mixed up between what multi-family is and what multi-single families are.
Okay, I don't see any of them. Let's see. What do we have in this? Family, individual, nope, that's family. Family, adoptive family, there we go. A building containing 4 or more dwelling units, dwelling one family. A detached building, dwelling 3 family, a detached building containing 3. Dwelling 2 family, detached 2. Dwelling unit, so there's nothing that talks about multi-one unit thing.
No, because that's considered a single dwelling unit, single family home.
and I think that's why they have the buffer
Right.
under
The
that.
whole idea of definition of a lot is, it's a lot for one dwelling unit.
No, then GR doesn't exist, then you can't have two families.
That's the state requirements.
No, that's our requirements.
Lot and common ownership,
No,
common ownership of a lot, yeah.
no, you can condo a 3-family. You can actually technically condo a 1-family if you want to be insane, but you can condo a 1-family, 2-family, 3-family. And that's how you get around not having the required lot. You can have a 2-family. You could be the prime owner of a 2-family and rent out the second unit, and then you could turn around and decide, I'm tired of being a tenant or a landlord, and condo both the units. And then it gets their own separate addresses, but the primary lot is owned by both of the owners. So that's why there is no, the multifamily states one building with multiple units. But if you have a single unit on a lot, that's a single family dwelling.
Yes, and the bylaws say only one single family dwelling on a lot, that's the standard.
Yes, if it's in single family zone district. If it's in multi-GR,
And
our
GR
zone allows
is
it.
still a single family zone district. Allows
Yes.
for multi.
Is GR is the only one that allows that provision of multiple
multiple.
Multi-family, yes.
multi-family and more than one
multi-dwelling.
principal dwelling unit on a lot is only on a GR, not in any other single-family residential district. 'Cause GR is the only district that allows for both, I guess. We allow for basically anything residential-wise.
Yeah.
It's, that's, I guess, in terms of those sections of the table of use, not to go too far into other, that's, do we wanna take a look at maybe revisiting those, if we wanna have those sections either tweaked, or do we wanna have those sections, I think Caroline made a comment to, consider confining the use table to the uses themselves and moving any dimensional requirements to a separate section such as section 6. Use table could include a footnote referring to dimensional requirements found in section, whatever, wherever we wanna put it, just a way to kinda clean that up.
Right.
So where are we now?
How far along are you?
How far along is it?
Well, actually, I had a couple of things that when I
Yeah.
read. One is 3GI. I want to reduce that 3.5 times.
Are you talking about for
Central
some
Business
D?
District?
Yeah, see, that's another, that's, that's a thing that I guess he's, there's all the other sections, all the other portions of section 5 that I think we can all take a look at now, and the section,
Which
the
section?
table of use itself
3GI,
is,
so it's under
Oh, it's in
residential.
the residential.
I think we're dealing with more substantive things there. I agree, we should take a look at it too, I'm just saying, do we wanna go line by line, or are we getting too much?
I mean, I just had a few things that I
Yeah.
looked through.
Oh,
and
yeah, that whole,
That's one of them that.
the multi-use needs to be looked at,
Yeah,
I
because
mean, cause right down below.
no one's
on the
using
B-
it as it's designed to be used.
The B zone is
That's all I
2
know.
times. So,
2 times, yep.
Yeah,
I mean, I would like to go to the 2 times, I
I'll be
mean,
perfect.
the idea is that if you're gonna build a big story, you put it in the center of town, but.
I'll be perfectly honest, I don't, I mean, when I first saw this, I was like, oh, great, well, they're basically allowing anyone to build whatever they can fit into a lot as long as it complies with everything else. So from a development standpoint, sounds great, but from a density standpoint and a regulatory standpoint, terrible. Cause I think most towns you
those
have.
5 to 6 story buildings.
Yeah,
They're allowed to do it, I mean, that's why I'd like to almost revert I was very pleased with our MBTA zoning, what we came up with. And I would rather have that as the underlying zoning than the existing one that we have right there.
yeah.
You know, so it's, I don't know if you can.
No, I know, this is a whole nother
But
kind
it's,
of.
I mean, because we went 3 stories,
Mhm.
and then if you had commercial on the first floor, you could go to the 4th story,
Okay.
and that's tall enough.
Yeah, but we also allow the provision where, this way it's written right now, it's like we have, empty commercial spaces.
they don't
because
care
Do
people
we
just
have anyone as a commercial tenant in the first floor of any of these dwellings that they
Of
built?
which ones?
Liberty Station.
Any of the mixed-use ones?
Yeah,
Is-
Livery Station has a gym, and we got a gym for him, that's open and going very good right now. We also have the potential of a restaurant going in there, he's in talks with them right now. 95 West, they have no intention, we've got them multiple tenants.
Well, they turned down a restaurant.
Yeah,
right?
they turn on a restaurant
Yeah,
for
We
us,
don't want you.
cause they're making,
So they're sacrificing the first floor. You know,
Yeah.
something like a nice convenience store, right?
yeah,
I know like in Florida, that when my daughter was living at the time, they had a nice little convenience store on the first floor, and you could pick something up when you get home, milk or bread or something like that,
Yeah.
whatever,
Mhm.
so,
You think that'd be?
well, good, but I mean,
So maybe we
that's
wanna-
my biggest thing on this
No.
rewrite, is to get rid of that 3.5,
I
mean.
agree, and I think maybe we want it rather than, because I know, just try to get through all of this briefly right now for this one meeting, but then for our next meeting, maybe we everyone kind of like note the different sections we want to kind of
Yeah.
start to address within the table of use. Only just because of just from a timing standpoint, if it's
Right.
11 right now, because that is a section though, and I think that's,
So-
it almost like you would rather just rewrite the thing rather than try to find a number that works, so it
Right.
should be, if we can have it be our MBTA zoning and figure that out, and that's a whole nother kind of, I'm not gonna care just because I'm
I was
like, I don't
gonna
know how
say,
it's gonna be.
You
Don't wanna
can
touch
wipe the slate clean,
Yeah.
you can rewrite this,
Yeah.
just, what is it
What
you
do you
like
mean, the
about
whole
it?
use table?
You could rewrite, yeah, we can do it the
Why?
entire.
Jim may just quit on you, just want you to know that, but.
Now that he's got this memorized, right?
Exactly.
And that's kind of
Start
where,
all over again.
Mhm.
and that's kind of what this whole process is, it's like how far do we go into it? I
Right.
think some parts I'm like, we should just rewrite the entire thing, and then other times it's like, well, there's enough there, we can make it work, and I don't, where do we wanna pick that? And I think this is a good example where maybe we should just rewrite the entire thing, because I think there's been enough kind of comments, and we've seen enough of it play out where we know where that's deficient, and we could probably find a way to just rewrite it.
yeah,
to be
I would too, if you are gonna look at this table to say to tweak things to your point, Ed, also look at table 6B1. So that's our zoning table, so because you could easily fix the 3.5 by changing the height requirement in 6B1.
Yeah.
So okay, you go 3.5 times, you could leave that in there going, instead of being 52 feet, now you can only go 40 feet. So 3.5 times might never be even
That's a good
possible by changing something very simple on 6B1 than going through this. So I would say, when you're looking at this, also look at the table on 6B1, because sometimes you could change one thing there, it doesn't matter what's here. Like, I'll never get to 3.5 times the CBD, because we just reduced the height to 4 stories. It'd be very, very hard to do it.
Yeah.
So you can use that to tweak, because
And I think it's also, I'm not sure 6 stories, 5 stories is too high though, I don't know, in some parts of Walpole.
But we're kinda lucky that those 2 buildings are set down a
Set
little
down,
bit.
Yeah, that's
Below,
one of the.
quite a bit below grade, but if they were up in
Well,
the peak of downtown, it's
It's like
like,
2 stories higher.
yeah, like Spring and West, you're
all the
gonna-
neighbors wouldn't see the light of day, the sunlight, right, so it's,
So that's where, yeah, cause I would think, like, the Patrick's, good work he got on, it took him a bit of a fight, but to get the height buildings on the Route 1 changed, which I thought was very funny to me that it took that much work to get, I would first see all those big buildings stuck in Route 1.
Right.
I'd rather a 10-story building on Route 1,
Yeah,
but he got pushback on it. And I'm going, the biggest part of Walpole, the highest building in Walpole since we got here and has been here for years, is the centre of town. So everybody complaining about the height of the centre of town, that's where you put the highest buildings.
yeah.
Why didn't we ever move them to Route
I think
1?
this is,
Yeah.
I can't remember what, I think it was John Lee I might have talked to.
What's that?
I think this is John Lee I might have talked to about when we were doing the MBTA, and I don't know, maybe you and John and Phil know, but like, when the initial CBD was written, when that whole provision was in there, was the intention to try to increase development, because it seems like that, the whole 3.5 has been there for decades. And there was no bite at the apple, and then all of a sudden, of course, housing has been in demand, and lo and behold, it's very accommodating to development, where,
Right.
you know, we probably should have taken a look at it a lot sooner than we did in terms of just seeing how it plays out, because it's definitely helpful for development, but maybe not for what the town wanted to see entirely within its downtown. And the thing that Jim's point in terms of height too, that was, I think, all those provisions were in there at a point to try to like, hey, we got nothing going on in the downtown, we wanna see redevelopment, but then, hey, well, now you got your redevelopment, and maybe it's
Not the
not
way
as,
you want it.
yeah.
So I would do more step back on the taller the building is.
Yep.
So it doesn't have that canyon. If you look at on Elm Street where, you know, Union, 95,
Or Western Spring,
west, on Elm Street,
the one on that, just, so 1034 East at Liberty Station.
1034 East.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah, I would have preferred if they had more step back off the street,
Yeah.
instead of being right on the.
come out that corner on East,
Yeah.
Is that the
you bless
Gilmore one?
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the
Just
Gilmore-
before Gilmore's there on the
Yeah.
left, yeah.
Yeah,
To cross over there, like, that's terrifying.
And all
That
that is,
should have been pushed back.
I mean, like my thing is, say, like Toll Brothers, I heard they were interested in the Jenna Medical property out over here. So, the CBD comes how far down East Street? So what if they went by the, underlying zoning, and they could probably put 5 or 6 story building right along 27 there, right? And then maybe in the back, they could use the MBTA zoning, right? They could split
yeah, I
it
mean,
up.
I think that whole
So-
area is under MBTA anyway, so. But, oh, I know
No,
what you're
no,
saying,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
MBTA,
yeah,
but
yeah.
the central business
Yeah.
district,
Yeah.
right along, and I don't know how far it goes up 1A, you know, up Main Street. But, I mean, they could
I think
wrap
the
that
main
whole
Makes
quadrant
one,
in a
yeah,
5 or
yeah.
6 story building, and
Yeah,
now you're gonna notice it, if it was
Yeah.
right there, you know?
like that's what we
So-
noticed with Spring and West. They went with our right zoning, they're getting 95 units, a 5-story building.
If they did MBTA, they'd be stuck at 40,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know, but you know why,
Right.
because the way the MBTA was, I think we put a lot more thought, it was more prescriptive in how we wrote it. And I think when this was written, it was definitely more like, let's see what we can
I
catch,
mean, we
whereas
tried,
more
but they
zoning.
didn't go for the
Yeah,
MBTA. so-
that's right.
But no, I think we're getting a little bit into it, but I think we
Okay,
should think of, take it
So
all.
I had a couple other things here.
Yeah.
So if you go to 3, I know you crossed it out here, but just for instance, 3L I think it is, no, wait a minute,
3L.
No, yeah,
revision,
3L.
Small flock of poultry.
small flock. I mean, how can you say it? I think you have to put a number on that, because to me, a small flock is 5 or 6. To maybe Jim or Patrick,
Yeah,
a small
small
flock
flock
might be
defines small
150.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I think we have to define that, right?
You're right, yeah.
Right. And again, this is also something you stop and say to yourself, okay, do we even have to get to that level of detail? Because
Yes.
we could, no, but I'm just
Regulate the number of
thinking,
chickens you can.
how, you know, we could say something like the raising or keeping of animals of some sort, you know, for non-commercial purposes, right? They're gonna have to go to the Board of Health
Mhm.
for a permit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For whatever the animals are and however the animal's waste is gonna be dealt with and whatnot. So, does it matter to us what the small flock is? And, okay, so I only can have like a small flock of poultry, but I could have as many horses as I want, you know, because we don't say, we don't put a
Right.
number there, we kind of,
Yeah.
I think we should just defer the number
I think that's why
to
it
the
was,
Board of Health.
I think that's why it was just put in as small flock, I'm going to assume, because it does defer to the Board of Health and to the Animal Control
Mhm.
Officer. So if you want chickens in this town, you have to go to the Board of Health, and then they send out the Animal Control Officer and see how many you have, and they look up what you land have, what the structure you're gonna put them into, the size of it, and they will determine one, yeah, that's fine for 5, no, you can only have 2. So they actually determine the number.
Okay.
So even if we wrote in there's only 5 chickens, but they allow it, then it's allowed, because again,
Because
we
I have
work with other
chickens.
laws. Yeah.
And
Because.
You have a small flock.
Well, now I do because we only have 4 left, the animals.
Yeah.
But to your point, Jim, there is guidance on how much square foot you
Yeah.
need
Right.
for both in the
Runs.
coop and in the run.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And, and then the animal inspector help, regulate,
yeah. So I do that as well, as you're looking at this,
yeah.
to that point I film it, is if you do see something, do highlight it and ask, because I'll say, yeah, that's why some things I go, no, that's fine, because I know I have other codes that back us up. So something like that's why I'm assuming it was left at small flock, because you don't dictate zoning, say a number, when legally you can with the health department and the animal control officer, you can have more.
Because then don't we have a thing about dogs are boarding, maximum of 5, is it, or 6 or something
Yeah,
like
but then
that?
again, state law kicked in and
Yeah.
changed what was a personal kennel versus a commercial kennel, and
Right,
how many dogs under 6 months of age and all of that. So again, we wouldn't have to worry about, we don't say, for example, how many dogs you can keep in zoning, because that's gonna be determined by state law and by the town
Yeah.
clerk's licensing.
So where it comes into play, like to give you an example too, is law states if you have a house, you can rent out 4 rooms to 4 individuals. I could have a house and I could be renting the room out to 4 families, because it says you after 4 rooms you go 5 rooms or 5 individuals. It becomes a lodging house in residential, but it's of non-kinship. So if you rent a room to a family of husband and wife in one room, you rent your second room to a husband, wife and 2 kids, you technically get around the 4 rooms, we rent the 4 rooms, so that one house has 4 people, another house has 8 people. Then we defer to the health board, because they go on square footage of a person, of a human being, what they're allowed to live in. So they would step in and go, yeah, building code allows it, health department does not allow it, you have to move some of those people out. So we use our zoning, we mix, that's where it gets fun. I know we're looking at zoning, but there's also backup to it, so that's what I'm saying, if you think of something, feel free to email me or next time the meeting going, why is like small flock there? Because we defer to the health board, because they have requirements, so we don't need to put in, because again, we couldn't put in a number there, because they'll overrule us and they will allow it, because again, that's a state law. That'll leave us up to,
And Walpole restricts roosters in all the
Yes.
districts other than rural.
yeah.
We can't have a rooster in so,
Otherwise, you'd really make friends with your neighbors.
Yeah.
Definitely.
so Carolyn, and then on W, the accessory dwelling unit,
Yes.
what did you mean by comment? I mean, that's really not gonna change though,
No,
The areas,
it's
right?
just that the footnote would now refer to, or it needs to, we make sure that we refer to, the footnote would say, see section 5-B2, accessory dwelling units, for further regulation. I suppose in a way, we don't even need a footnote, quite frankly. We've got a table of contents. There's some uses in here where we have a little more detail someplace else in the bylaw. I don't really know why the footnote was there, other than it was referring people to another section
I
in more
think-
detail,
Yeah, I
but
think it was originally kept in just, if you want to speak to that, Patrick, I think it was because when we had the in-law,
Oh, yeah.
when we had the in-law just was originally, was in-law, see footnote 4, and essentially the 5B2. So I think when we done the ADU, we just kept the footnote there, because it was,
Right.
rather than another scrivener taking it, like, crossed out, I think
It-
that's why it was left there.
it technically, it can come out, because
Yeah,
hopefully in 2 weeks, your bylaw passes, and we'll see what the Attorney General does with it, but, it'll be on the books, there won't be any need to say, see this other section of the bylaw.
the ADU gonna be its own section, or?
Yes,
already
yes,
its
it
own
already
section,
knows
right,
it, we
right.
would, it was,
We just kinda, we
Right,
just
yeah.
can't
Based in
because,
law.
Just thinking.
yeah,
you really don't need it, I don't know.
And
I think it
then
was there from the in-laws.
the only other
It
note,
was, we just changed the wording.
the only other note I had here was 4PI with the outdoor dining.
Or
Um,
Okay.
For some outdoor dining, yeah.
So, Jim, I think you might have the same issues that we have in the plumbing, that they start with this outdoor dining, and, you know, plumbing, we have fixtures, you know, toilets for men and women, and we have the charts that we go by for everything, and we have the building, we approve the building, this and everything else, and all of a sudden they put 20, 30,
20 more
50
seats
seats
out there.
outside.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now they're not compliant. And it was okay during the pandemic
Mhm.
because they weren't using the inside, so they
Right.
weren't increasing their capacity. But now the outdoor dining is so popular, they have the inside and the outside, and it's tough. And I don't know how we can
So,
actually,
we're actually pretty on top of that, so if you want to do outdoor dining, you apply for it very similar to the ADU, you get a limited site plan review before you're approved for outdoor dining, so you have to come to us, again, fire, health, police, everybody look at it, see if they have any issues with outdoor dining, and we look at it from the building side with the plumbing count, so anybody that has outdoor dining in this town, the plumbing count does meet what the requirements are.
see, because I really can't do anything about it until they get a plumbing permit.
Yeah,
Then once they do, then
yeah, no, it comes
it'd be
to
a
us.
battle, but I would have to make them compliant, or they would have to go to the state.
Yeah, no, we
So,
have it at either, so some businesses have outdoor dining, and they've applied and either built on new bathrooms to meet that number, or what we've given in their occupancy, because again, we do the 3 or 4s every year, so we give an occupancy number. If they want outdoor dining and don't have a plumbing count, they are taking seats from inside to outside to get, so they can still have some outside dining, but the number has not changed as a total,
Right.
so we do watch it that way, yeah.
Because we've had somewhat of an issue in Norwood too, that a lot of the restaurants are using the sidewalk, which is public property, so it's not their property, so it really doesn't count as
Yeah, so we have
against
that.
them, you know, towards their account. Because it's,
It should still.
it should,
does.
but it's gonna be a hard battle to,
Oh.
but that's the
We've
building
easy one.
inspector.
Our volunteers have to work, everybody's working well with us, they've done the limited, anybody's, obviously Tessie's and Ravens has to take over the sidewalk, they have to meet the AAB compliant for handicap accessibility, the spaces they're taking, the other businesses, they sign an agreement with the town, they rent the space off us, and their insurance cover them on our public property, before the select board's office will even let them, so they have to sign a full contract, and we do our full review to make sure their numbers cover, and they have the permission to be on our town. If it's not, they won't be allowed to do it.
Now, how is Crisp getting away with that enclosed outdoor
his
area?
property.
Cause, so, that was, he got it, 'cause so again, the building itself on Crisp is a non-conforming structure. The building that's already against the road is a conforming structure. Because in CBD, your front yard setback is 0 to 25. Your building has to
It is
be
CBD.
brought forward, he is CBD. So he is that portion is conforming. Bathroom count wise, to Ed's point, he wasn't, we locked him out with the bathroom count, he wanted more. So he actually went to the state plumbing board and requested extra, he requested a variance to allow him, so his bathroom count at the time was for, I believe, 65. He's up to 77 people there. The state gave him the variance allowing him to go to 77. He can't exceed that though. And that includes inside in the main building and outside.
Now, is that's considered a structure, I assume?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
but, and because it's in CBD, you can have
Mhm.
more than one structure on a site.
But that's also accessory to the primary.
So, do they have cooking,
It's a commercial
In that-
ADU.
No, it's
Yeah.
just a strict bar.
strictly serving?
Serving from the bar. All the food comes from the.
Anything else? Yes, do we wanna-
I was just asking where we're going next on the.
Yeah, let's let's just skip ahead.
I don't wanna stay too late if that's possible.
No, I agree.
But it's
Especially since they've already shut the lights out.
I saw that too, I was like,
What time?
You're in for the night.
it's 8:30,
Last
so
hour.
let's think of like 9 as a hard cutoff. Sorry, Jim. Wanna just go to enclosure of uses, 5.3, or well, 5C, but to be 5.3. This is the one area that I've never understood this, and Jim, you can probably speak to this too. I don't know why we have this section. This is to do with, basically identifying uses that do not need to be inside a building, and it goes almost like,
Then we have our 14 exceptions to it.
yeah, right, it's.
Yeah.
So my first thought is I don't know if whether or not the solution is easier to the fact that we don't need it, or is there an easier way to kind of clarify
See,
this?
Well, I
It's at the end of
think
this section.
I could be way off base, but as I read the exceptions, it seems like the idea is something that is not traditionally contained within a building needs to have a fence around it to sort of delineate it, probably also for, safety, theft purposes and all of that.
Yep.
If that's then the case, couldn't we just say that if a use is either exercised within an enclosed building, or if not, if outside, it has to be enclosed by a fence. And then if there are some of these exceptions that seem to make some sense, then okay, let's keep them, but does it, like D is my favorite, plants grown in soil. What does that mean? Does that mean that my garden has to be fenced in? Or was that
within
intended
an
to be
enclosed
a
structure,
nursery,
yeah.
or a Christmas tree stand or something?
Yeah, it's.
It's one section, I'll be honest, since I've been here, it's never ever come up in anything we've
Mhm.
ever done. It's never, to the best of my knowledge, we have board members here, they can speak to it too. I don't think it's ever come up in a board meeting, this
Well,
section.
How about like an orchard or something where you're picking apples or something?
That's an awful big fence, isn't it, if it has to be enclosed?
So, and then
Again,
again,
this is a completely enclosed building, not even a fence. So I think it goes with like I'd say.
Well, it says accept that.
except the following.
So you wouldn't have to be fencing them.
I mean, would it be easier to think of it instead as, like what I've seen in some communities is they'll have a category for, say, outdoor storage or outdoor
like the dumpsters.
uses and right, like the dumpsters or, large things like that. Sometimes you think of like landscaping yards, here's your pile of mulch, your
Yeah.
pile of gravel, whatever. Things that are outdoor types of uses that are typically addressed by a special permit. So that we don't wind up with, a 10-foot high mulch pile right next to a residential neighborhood. Cause I don't think I remember seeing anything generically like that about outdoor sales and services or things like that in the use table.
Well, they would have to have the buffer there though, right, to the residential?
Well, it's in
Yeah.
all, non-residential districts. So you have the setbacks already there, if there are residential, if there's a zoning line for
Mhm.
districts, the buffers come off of that. And again, most of these are done with either a limited site plan or a full site plan. So again, like Phil said, the dumpsters, that's always looked at, where your parking's looked at, if you're storing material, that's looked at. And it's one of those things, I think, when you go to a site plan, most of these are covered. Because again, like, when you do like dispensing of dispensing of fuels, lubricants, the garage or service station, they're either outside where you're getting up to the pumps to get petrol, or you're changing oil, which is inside in the building. So the enclosure of use, the enclosure, you're working on your car, your mechanic, it's inside the building, or you're getting petrol outside. They're usually the two, so it's kind of a section that I still haven't figured out why it's there.
And it's so confusing, you'd have to read through all the subsections here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
You know, B, D, C, G,
I
H.
know.
Right, right,
Like
you
that.
cross-reference,
Yeah.
and what are all those things,
Yeah.
right?
20 or 30 things,
Yeah.
That's
So
why I
your
was,
suggestions need to make sense to me, Carolyn.
well, and if you look at your exceptions H and I, that's where you have the open display of goods or open storage of materials. Maybe we could simplify it to just focus in on those two categories as requiring an enclosure, or if they're permitted by special permit, which probably a lot of them would be, can't that just be a condition of the special permit, that the special permit granting authority decides what makes sense? You know, like I think of like the little, you know, the local hardware store who every day opens up, you know, in the morning and they put their cart of certain things, you know, rakes and their whatever, you know, is on sale, they put it out on the sidewalk, you know, maybe it's not supposed to be on the sidewalk itself, but yeah, they line the snow blowers up or things like that. And then at the end of the day, they cart them all back in. Well, what do you do with that? You know, do we prohibit that, or do we look the other way, or do we wanna regulate outdoor storage a little differently as its own category?
yeah, because I think I and H and I do send it back to the tables, which has, again, under 5 does say the percentage of outdoor storage you can have, so,
No, I don't consider that storage, I consider it display.
And that's why when you get in here to this section, everything has to be in a building except open display of goods, products, and equipment, you know, as a permitted, as an accessory to a permitted use, or open storage of materials.
So that covers a lot of it.
It certainly does, yep. Mhm. Which is why I think it might just be simpler to take those two categories, make sure they're explicitly in the use table, and then decide how do you wanna allow them. And most of what I see with stuff going outside, it's by special permit.
yeah. 'Cause like the first one, that dispensing beverages at a drive-in or a stand, that's already a special permit anyway up through the zoning board. So that's already in our zoning, that if you're doing a drive-through or drive-up window, you're going for a special permit anyway.
Right.
The outdoor dining area, it's a limited site plan, so it's already going to, not so much a board, but it's going to all the department heads to it looked at. Again, dispensing of fuel, lubricants and fluid. Again, gas stations, they go through rigorous inspections. Again, you do a new gas station, you're going before the planning board for site plan. The use, in some places you're going for it. Plants grown in soil, honestly, that's agricultural, that's bulletproof, you can't touch them. Automatic parking lot, again, you create a new parking, it's a new use, you're going before the boards with the setbacks, and you're gonna put all the buffers and setbacks there. So that's why I'm looking through this, trying to figure out why it was put in there and what it pertains to. I think it might pertain to something in a previous zoning, and the zoning changed, but this section just was left there. Cause being honest, I haven't figured out why it's.
My guess is, and I could be totally off base, is somebody came up with a use that didn't require a building. And I'm thinking of like a contractor's yard.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna put my bays of mulch, gravel,
Yeah.
steel plates, whatever it is.
Mhm.
Is that anything any of us wanna be looking at across the street? No.
Yeah.
But I don't require a building permit because I didn't put up a building.
Yeah.
And there's no structure to be had.
Yeah.
So maybe it was designed to kind of capture those types of uses,
Yeah.
so that there would be some kind of enclosure, probably at one point, maybe even some kind of buffer or landscaping around it.
Jim, the way they have it set up with those concrete things separating things, is that considered a structure?
Yeah.
Well, not to give it too much of an example, but Sunset, you have that issue with
Yeah, dumpsters.
so
Yeah.
they're only basically they came before the board because they were doing earth removal,
Yeah.
but they're storing dumpsters, they wanna store landscaping clippings, they
Yeah.
wanna have it be an impound yard for.
Yeah, so that
where is that?
So it's
Zero
Zero
Sunset.
Sunset, it's behind Dry Creek and Route 1. near the preserve.
Oh, yeah.
So there was 3 lots back there that sold to the gentleman who originally came in and said he was gonna store just dumpsters. So he said, okay, fine, he had to level some of it, he leveled everything. So we sent him back to the board, he got a special permit, so something like that, but he's exacerbated it, so he's gonna be going back to the planning board, cause now he's created parking spots, cause he wants to start storing trucks and material. It was dumpsters, technically dumpsters don't have a parking spot, they're just left there.
Yeah.
That's where that will come into.
So the uses that are allowed, but at the same time, they're at the same,
So could you reword it? I said, I'll give you the idea, and then Patrick words it properly, cause he's the linguist. But to that point, could you do what Caroline said, keep H and I in there as a primary on something that's tied into a building,
Mhm.
and then also word it some way that if there's no structure for outdoor storage, you have to meet these criteria, if there's no building or structure there.
Or even eliminate 5.3 enclosure of uses entirely,
Yeah.
but then add H and I, like the outdoor display of goods or outdoor storage of materials.
Yep.
Add those to the use table.
So they are in the use table already, under 5.
Okay.
Yeah, the numbers that are right here.
Yeah, they have the
Numbers
numbers.
that are right there.
Yeah, so if you go back, it says outdoor storage,
So maybe they're not needed.
well, no, but I do like the point Patrick made and Caroline made about if you don't have a building and you start parking something like dumpsters,
Retail sales
Or-
and service
like-
greater than, right?
lumber and staging and stuff, you just dump it in your yard.
I
Yeah,
mean, that's not to go into the one specific example, not to call them out, but that's a good example of, it's in a business district, it's allowed by right what they're doing there, but they're also, you know, right next to a
So
residential
would
use,
be,
they
Um,
have
four-
fencing, they've got.
4Z and double A, double B, so outdoor display of goods for sale on premises or storage. It goes through there as portions of it.
Screen from here, yeah.
Or C,
This is
4Z,
5D.
sorry,
or
Z,
Z,
Z, Z.
Zeb.
How do you pronounce it? Z,
Z.
Z?
Z, alright, cause it's Z. 4Z.
But the bylaw says refer to line C of 4, and then that is not,
Like,
Whatever
yeah.
it
Quite
says.
right.
Yeah.
that's retail sales,
So that whole thing's already wrong, so.
right?
So something like that, that because Caroline said if we make it a section, just H and I and add,
I like the way you're trying to tie it back to the use and get rid of section 5.3,
yeah.
mostly because I think it's just a bunch of.
So how do we get to your point, on Caroline's point, if you just throw material on the ground with no building, we want to protect the neighbours from that as well.
But if just outdoor storage is, you know, a use in and of its
Use
own,
products, yeah.
Or making a full use of it, so,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
Outdoor storage, which.
and require special permit, so,
yeah,
And it's all one place, one table.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
put one
Yeah.
in the,
You don't have to read this stuff, just go right to the table, you know
one
what you
in
have to do.
the wholesale industrial, and the other in business.
That's also
Yeah,
a good
co-
point.
so cover both sections, kinda, yeah.
So there's the open outdoor storage of materials, that's under wholesale, so 5D,
5D kinda covers some of that, yeah.
but it's all allowed
That's
by right,
allowed, yeah, so you're gonna change it.
but. Changing that to special permit.
And screen from view, so it's the fencing of trees.
You wanna have it be more specific, it's gonna review it or not.
It's the right area, so change to the, by rights to special permits.
so for example, 5D, where you'd have the open or outside storage of materials, it's allowed in 3 of your zoning districts, and otherwise prohibited. We flip those all to special permit, and then somebody, you know, whether it's the zoning board or the planning board, then looks at this and says, okay, I wanna make sure that your lights are dark sky compliant and not shining down in your
Shining all night long.
neighbors, I want fencing or partial fencing, I want the
Screening.
buffer and landscaping, right?
Usually I'm all for trying to make things a little easier, but this is one of those things where it's, you know, I think it really should be a special permit, because I think we
Yeah.
have enough situations where it comes up and it probably gets abused. I don't know.
Yeah, 'cause it's a lot more popular, we're all seeing like the, not so much open, but the warehouses right now around town, we're getting a lot more bays being built for storage. That's getting very popular with contractors, and we do have 1 or 2 properties that do have open storage that,
Well, the other question too is, you could even make a distinction, is it open storage as a principal use that we want to require special permit for, as opposed to open storage as an accessory that we may allow up to some sort of percentage or up to a certain, square footage.
I like that.
I like that, yeah.
Cause an accessory, yeah, I don't think it needs a special permit, I think it should be part of the principal, but if it's,
Mhm. Okay.
if principal uses that we're just buying yard and we're storing
Storing it.
material, then
Yeah.
it should be a secured, and you should have some sort of overview of that.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be good, cause if it's tied back to primary building, the odds on it having the fencing already gone through a site plan is pretty good.
Yeah.
So it's already been ran through the board, but if it's used as a standalone yard, that's all
Yeah.
it's doing is just throwing stuff
We're
there.
just storing random
Yeah,
stuff.
they make
Yeah.
that
It
special
looks like
permit.
we'd need another listing on the floor, cause it doesn't seem like any of the existing ones really cover.
Yeah, I think maybe just cause it's more of a wholesale
Yeah,
use to begin with, I don't know if it needs to be in four, if it just be referred
put it
to
under
five.
five, cause it's really a wholesaler.
Yeah, cause you're not a business, you're not selling
Not selling
anything
to people,
there.
no one's coming to your lot, you're using it as wholesale for yourself to store everything and move on. I think we could tweak D and put a D and DI. So the first one is as of right, if it's, to Caroline's point, if it's a standalone, just all storage, special permit.
Well, that's if we have an accessory use table too.
Yeah.
If you have a separate accessory use table, then
You
you
can
could
tweak
have
it,
that,
yeah.
and you could say it's a by right, or, I don't know, if Karen said you wanna have that as a percentage, or it's tied to your,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if it's accessory, again, we're back to, it would have to be subordinate.
To the primary.
So is that under 50%, but do you wanna go even further? And maybe it just depends on the use,
Yeah,
or the
'cause
size
it-
of the parcel of
yeah.
land,
Yep.
But
Well,
I'll take another look
Does it
at,
come to a point where, right now what's coming to mind is the old woodworkers place down there, where they had all sorts of play yards, buildings and fences all set up in the front area. Do we need something that will cover something like that?
I think
So
that would
that
be
can-
the outdoor
Outdoor, the under four,
display of goods,
Yeah.
products, as permitted
so if you
to
go
a main
to
use.
4Z, Z, give it a, last time.
any other retail businesses.
AA and BB, outdoor display of goods for sale on premise, accessory to the primary or the permitted main use, and that's where that would fall under.
And again, I would
Yes,
only
it's
put
total.
open display of goods as an accessary use only. I don't
Yeah,
think
cause
we'd
Z
want,
doesn't really
No.
stick to the outside either, it's not mentioning it, but we're looking
Not so
at
much Z, but
outside.
the double A and the double B
Oh,
go just below that. Oh, they're not, sorry, my apologies, they're not tied in together. It restarts again. So we have those
well,
two.
that's really manufacturing and stuff, yeah, okay, BB, yeah, so BB kind of covers that, you're right.
Yeah, no, I like what Caroline and Patrick are saying is get rid of the other section 5 altogether and put it in the warehouse section where if you're standalone, just storage, it's a special permit, but if you're accessory to a building, then it's as of right.
right,
No.
just because it just caught my eye, do we need a use for yard sales?
We have it.
I know, but do we need that?
Yes.
We're only allowed,
Yes.
we're not,
Only in fact, only to keep it from being constant, I think.
but, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, do folks have to go to the select board to get a yard sale permit?
They go to, I believe, the clerk's office to get, I think our zoning, I've never enforced or come across, but I think you're allowed 2 a year.
Mm-hmm, or three, no
Three.
more than 3.
But no one's ever complained or come near us about it. I honestly don't know if you didn't go in and get them. I think they have them on Saturdays and just do it at their own.
Definitely
Yeah,
to
well,
someone that had a neighbor of too many yard
Oh,
sales.
well, yeah, it just, that,
Yeah,
I know some people have one every other week, so.
Yeah, I know Marblehead, they send their inspectors out on the weekend. They have a
Really?
zoning enforcement officer that goes out on Saturdays in the summertime. And if he sees a yard sale and they don't have a permit, he closes it down completely.
Alright, let's, so, for and Jim and I have talked about this one before, so for 5D, excavation filling of earth, as well as 5E, earth removal, I think both those two subsections, we had looked at this a few years ago, because they really both need kind of like almost like an overhaul
Yeah.
entirely. We've had too many issues where it's come up and it hasn't, we can find a better way of, I guess, enforcing it, not even enforcing it, having it.
Not even that, making a ruling on it,
Making a
because
ruling on it,
it's
yeah.
been ruled on by personal opinion, not zoning or fact. It's, I don't
Yeah.
like you, I'm voting this way, or I like you and I'm voting this way. Because it's not that it's very unclear, it's got no teeth.
True.
Yep.
So it's very ambiguous to which way you can go. So, and again, we've had a few, and we're going to have more cases, and we're going to lose every one of them. As much as KP law will help, I don't think you have a help with it. And as I said to Patrick, I'd like to talk to our engineer Carl on this too, because he deals a lot with that side of it, dirt removal and stuff to get. And I've looked into other towns on what restrictions other towns have put in. So I'm making up a list on this to kind of give us, because right now, as long as you're tied back to a primary use, you can do whatever you want on your lot. That's clear as day, it's black and white, there's no argument with it. Depends on who you ask. But that is 100% clear and white. And that's got us in a lot of trouble, because again, personal decisions are being made against certain people. We need to clean this up big time. Because again, we've had people who wanted just give an example is, we've had a gentleman who all he wanted to do was, he had a lawn, he wanted to make his lawn bigger, so he dug into his hill. Neighbour complained, he had to go for a special permit just to make his lawn bigger for his kids. Then we have a job that's,
Thinking of, yeah, the neighbor just didn't want his
he just didn't want to touch it.
land to fall.
Yeah, he liked the bushes, the hill, even though it's not his property, he liked it, but then wants to cut it out. And it did trigger this provision of earth removal. But then we have 55 acres getting completely mowed down as of right and being rubber stamped. And going,
Right.
okay, so the poor guy who's cleaning his yard for his kids has to jump through more hoops than a company moving 55 acres of soil. It's like, it's very, we need to rewrite this big time, I think.
I would
That's
agree
my
with that.
opinion.
Yeah.
And that's why I'd like to get Carl involved too on the engineering side, the town engineer. He'll have more insight into this. And again, I've looked at some towns where they have put, some towns have said if you touch it more than an acre, you're going for a special permit. Other towns have said if you move over half 500,000 cubic yards, that's getting close to the state allowance for what a quarry is defined as a quarry at the state. It's getting close to that, that triggers it. Because ours is, it's a tough one. It's 100 cubic yards if you're residential, or you're 150 if you're commercial. That's literally like 100 cubic yards, I've looked it up, is like 7 dump trucks. And on a commercial, that's 11. Any commercial site, 11 dump trucks is what happens on the first day of the job. But again, because the way it's worded that it's secondary, if it's secondary to the primary, you don't require a special permit. So you don't require
But
it.
you could be moving.
You could
400,000
move a
cubic
mountain
yards.
and
Yeah.
you do not require a special permit.
Yeah, I think that, I would agree with you totally, that should be,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we need to be worried and get some teeth, because it's kind of like we get it all the time, the noise ordinance falls under our general bylaws. And everybody goes like, my neighbour's making noise, what can you do? And I'm like, nothing. Because our general bylaw under 427 just says, if it's a nuisance within 150 feet. I've got a room of people here, every one of us can say what a nuisance is, and the other people mightn't agree with you. So how do I enforce something?
Yeah.
They don't have decibel, some towns have decibel levels. So I think this is one that, I think this is a big one.
Sometimes the way to simplify is that whatever is excavated there has to be a building permit that's been issued. And you're only allowed to remove or excavate as much as is necessary to fulfill whatever the building permit was issued for. So if
Exactly.
it's a septic system, this is how much you get to excavate. If it's a, 4-family building with commercial on the first floor, much more is gonna be excavated as opposed to, pick a number, you like 100 cubic yards, I like 50,
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm seeing more of too is you've got clear cutting, that no clear cutting and stripping of topsoil before a building permit is issued.
And people are ignoring that left and right.
Well, trees these right now are the thing that gets everybody out to town meeting, if you say no clear cutting, folks get upset. If you try to then, maybe just keep like a perimeter buffer so that your neighboring properties are at least protected, whatever you do in the interior, that's up to you. You wanna clear it for your pool, your patio, your pickleball court, have a good time,
Yeah.
but you're gonna maintain the vegetative buffer on the outside. That might be simpler than just picking a number.
Yeah.
Because you're right, that, when you say how many truckloads it is,
Yeah.
because I'm thinking to myself, how many cubic yards of mulch does my husband order every year? I'm like, that always seems like a pretty big pile to me. Okay, how many trucks is that gonna be? That's a lot of trucks for 100 cubic yards,
It's not just 100 cubic yards, it also says if you change the grade 1 foot.
Yes,
So I could put mulch on a bed over here that's a Home Depot bucket, that's 1 foot high.
yes.
That triggers a special permit.
Mm-hmm,
But if I take 6 inches off my backyard with a dozer and push it all to one side, that's not a special permit. That's where I think it combines two that make no
Yeah.
sense to me.
the other thing that's starting to trigger is some communities are looking at stormwater permits, land alteration permits. A lot of that tends to go to the Conservation Commission
Mhm.
because they're looking at, okay, well, you've taken down that example of the father who wants to enlarge the yard for the kids and cuts into a mountain. Okay, might have something to do with vegetation and privacy of the neighbor. It could also be that now suddenly the water flows differently. And now the neighbor on the other side is now downhill and the backyard floods where it didn't flood before.
Yeah.
Those are all things that, might be a good conversation to have with the Conservation Commission if they wanna take some of this on. Because I tend to agree with you reading this, not to mention the fact that you have your excavation and then you have your earth removal. I'm not so sure based on conversations I've had with you, I understand they're two different uses. But I'm not so sure mom and pop,
No,
picking up the zoning bylaw, see the difference between those two sections.
Yeah. And again, earth removal also goes on excavating. That's where it kind of gets confusing too, is earth removal goes on if you dig a hole or if you bring in material. So earth removal is taking it out or bringing it in. And then earth removal, that's under earth removal, but in excavation is just taking it out.
Right.
So one covers both and one just covers one. So that's where it kind of gets, the two of them kind of get intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be, and it,
It's supposed to
honestly,
be like a business, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the earth removal section, where the other one could be building anything.
anything,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, the earth removal bylaw, isn't that really just in here because there's one
Cord.
quarry that's still in operation but it's now non-conforming? Is that what the story is?
So there was two, one's gone because it got a use for an AQV.
Okay.
I
So-
thought that was still active, huh?
No, so that's the problem, that's one of the things that got rubber stamped in this town, got pushed through. Once they got, and my understanding, please correct me Caroline if I'm wrong, they got approved for an AQV and start putting the roads in. Now they're using that land as the AQV, they've abandoned their use and are under section
Okay, I
6.
didn't realize they had.
Yeah, well, they're still quarrying that use, and we've been trying to tell them they can't quarry, because under our section 6 and section 9, there's two sections that basically state, once you abandon the use, willingly abandon use, it's gone.
Right.
They got approved to spend 8 years, I think 13 site plans, was it? Before they got that.
Long time.
Yeah, they milked it because they were quarrying while they were going through the board, but they got approved use. Once you get approved use, you have voluntarily abandoned that use.
Yeah, they held zoning request, planning board request and special permit that went with it, and they just kept extending.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For years, just to keep it open.
Yeah, so that's where, so that quarry is gone, and people keep saying, oh, it's a quarry. They legally do not have a quarry there, it's been abandoned. Because now they're already started work on the AQV, they've been approved for the AQV. So you voluntarily give up that quarry. So there is no quarry there, they're not allowed, it's an illegal use. If they're still quarrying, that's a zoning violation, that's easy.
But the other one?
The other one is still, it's up on West Street, LaRusso's. Yeah, so that's still an active plant.
But I don't see earth removal in the use table. So did
No.
we
That's old.
take it out. So is it, that's what I'm asking, like, it seems to me,
Really,
the use has been eliminated from the use table, which means it's no longer a use allowed, but we have this provision that seems to be in just so that the existing quarry comes in to get their permit renewed from
Yeah.
time to time. I mean, if this is only here as sort of a vestige of the past for this non-conforming quarry, perhaps number one, we should make it clear that earth removal as a principal use was deleted from the zoning bylaw in such and such a year, whatever it was, and the provisions of this section only pertain
To
to
existing.
the, lawfully existing, non-conforming earth removal operation.
Mhm.
And when that operation goes away, this bylaw should go
Sure.
away. And then, do we need to have all of this detail in there where if they're an existing operation,
they don't,
how much of this, are they reapplying and provide all this information to us from time to time? Or, because it's almost written like a new applicant coming in and here's everything you'd have to provide.
I'm gonna have to leave, my ride is here.
no, yeah, I think we're at that time.
But I do support the whole earth removal,
Yep.
that's been something that's been before our board.
Yeah,
It's been a problem, there's been a lot of
Yeah.
questions.
What you're saying too, Carolyn, I pick up what you're saying, we don't, is this a use that we want to continue seeing in town in future operations, or is this just kind of like, let it die? Should we just remove this?
Right.
Or should we- you know what I mean?
and then we'd only have to concentrate on, that removal's gone, then we're only concentrating on the other section.
Excavation and filling of earth, which is
Yeah.
just something that comes up.
That is the biggest,
Periodically.
that fights with
Yeah.
everybody. We get that cleared up.
Carolyn, thank you,
Good
good
to
meeting
see
you in
you.
person, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for all your help on
I'm
this.
sure we'll be seeing each other
Thank you
again.
for,
Yeah.
your help on this, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, all.
Thanks, Bill.
Alright.
So yeah, I think we should think of wrapping it up now too but I wanna leave, I guess, in a good area where, I guess maybe Jim and I can wanna sit down, and see if we can talk to Carl, and maybe come back with some notes, and land with
Okay.
some notes regarding section 5D, or 5.4, excavation, filling of earth. Earth removal itself, I'm okay removing something that doesn't get used if it's just kind of
If
taken
it's-
up.
Yeah, if it's
Yeah,
one that use that's
space.
there that's going to continue.
And it's already allowed, so it's
That's
not like
allowed.
they're coming, I don't even know, do they do anything every year?
If they're doing any blasting and that, they renew it with the fire department through state law for blasting.
But that's an impact on the
But
zoning.
not us, no.
So really,
Yeah, I don't know that I would
I would do
recommend
this.
like eliminating the whole thing, but for example, the whole section on the application and pre-submittal analysis, that ship has sailed.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know?
Oh, yeah,
If we wanna make sure that the existing use comes in periodically to have their permit renewed and, if there's some soil or well testing that we want them to do, okay, that's fine. Certainly we wanna keep the surety in place, but otherwise I think we could probably eliminate an awful lot of this.
I'm all for that.
Okay, so why don't I take
We wanna
a
see more
closer look at that one?
businesses. Temporary uses, I don't know if we can get into that right now. I don't have any comments or questions.
Yeah, the only thing is temporary is just, again, what's in there. We have the Christmas tree guys that come in down and stop and shop. We did have a gentleman that put up a temporary shed to sell wreaths out of, it affected no one really. But other than that, no one ever comes in for.
Yeah. So some questions there regarding the timing, the days, so if we could change the use. The use or occupancy of personal land, building, or structure for a fixed period of time, not to exceed 35 days, with the intention of discontinuing or return to the original condition upon expiration of the time period. Included but not limited to the use and sale of Christmas trees or other seasonal uses, but excluding short-term rentals as defined under general law, chapter 64G. I don't have a problem with that.
so we can add that to section 14.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Consider combining A and D and B and C, temporary uses and temporary structures respectively. Are temporary uses for charitable purposes limited to 35 days? Jim, do you know if that offhand?
And then temporary structures are 180 days. I mean, do you ever have a need for a temporary use to be greater than 35 days?
Not that I've come across ever.
Okay. Alright.
Would like one of those trailers they use for like when they're building or something, they have
Yeah.
like a trailer, that fall under this temporary use?
Not so much, so the site trailers, we have it that if you're doing a site trailer, it's in our zoning that you have to get a permit every 6 months for that trailer while it's on site.
Okay.
Renew it. Temporary, usually, the best ones I can think of is if someone has one of those moving pods, they usually put on their property while they're moving, but they never stay that long. Or if they're getting work done in their house, they'll put one outside while the work's being done.
Mhm.
We don't really enforce much on it, because honestly, it's tied back to the house itself. You're fixing up, you're doing a new
Yeah.
kitchen, you moved all
You
your
know
appliances
it's
in,
gonna go away.
you know what is there.
Mhm.
So yeah, we honestly, we do not get it at all, really, being honest. Like we can probably clean up a small bit, but I don't see an issue with leaving it there. Again, it does cover us with temporary businesses, again, Christmas tree. Like the mall since they were taken by the Wilder Group, they do an outdoor every 5-6 months where they take over a section of the outside area, and people come set their little tents up to show what goods they have, so that people on the mall gets more life back to the mall.
Really?
Yeah, the one coming
Interesting.
in May, mid-May, I believe it's going to be there on Saturday. So they get a temporary permit for that. So things like that, it works.
Never seen it.
Yeah.
What about like farmers markets and stuff like that? Do they come to you?
No, so there is a farmer market that goes on, I believe, on the
Somewhere
common up
park.
here on East Street.
They have like a overhang or something, a
Yeah.
structure that's already there, but that's a
Set up
permanent
for it,
structure,
yeah.
kind
They
of.
set up their
They aren't
stalls.
actually building anything, I think they're using.
Yeah, and all the
What do
permits,
they use,
permit.
tables? or-
tables and kind of their own little pop-up tents. And it's an agreement with the town, and they go through the health department, so they don't come near us either.
Okay.
Buffer zones, I'd rather go into detail right now, but I think we talked about before whether or not that should be moved to section 6.
Yes, we did,
You know,
yeah.
kind of
That
thing,
makes sense.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
It's a dimensional.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, before going into all the details, I guess just say that should be moved to 6.
Okay.
Stadium event overlay parking, moving that to its own separate section entirely, makes sense. Considering we do that for like MBTA is a good example, so if that's its own separate section.
Okay.
Mentioned the recreational marijuana establishments.
Yeah,
Yep.
that I'm just recommending, keep it in, just for
Yep.
your historical information, in case anyone says, well, when did we vote back when that ballot question first came out? It's a short section, no harm in keeping it there.
Okay. And I think that's it. I know we have the inclusionary housing requirement, which is new. Which I don't know if that probably wasn't included when you did the zoning diagnostic, but I was at it last year with the MBTA.
Yeah, I don't.
And I didn't have any
yeah.
problems with the other changes to like the event stadium overlay parking. I don't know if anyone saw anything else, like all the recommendations there totally make sense to me.
Okay. And I think what I'll do then is redo 5 based on some comments we've talked about tonight. Obviously, we still have some work to do with earth removal. And then, work on 6 and starting to break these out. If we're gonna move them into their own sections, just start to separate them into a separate document so we don't lose these things in the process.
Yep.
Because then I think the next big one after 5 and 6, you've got signs on for this town meeting, so then the next thing will be parking. And we're taking a chunk out of here, out of 9 for parking too.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of planning for the fall, initially I was thinking, 5, 6, 9, but do we wanna put 8 in there as well, or, I think that probably makes sense, yep.
Yep.
Yeah, we have to, I think zoning or warrant article opens
July,
in July, beginning of August, yeah.
yeah.
I think
It's like it's always town meeting season, isn't
It's
it?
always time season.
You barely get done with one, we're on to the
I
next.
got here late, and I didn't catch your name.
Carolyn Murray.
Alright, that was a lot, sorry. Any other, so that first comment, no, I think, no. Table use though, just everybody, and I mentioned, I'll send an email out just for Sarah to see as well. Anything you notice that you kinda want, have a deeper discussion about in terms of moving it, whether to the accessory, or whether we wanna have it kind of revised and just have a longer discussion with, send that to me beforehand, or we can try to just have a discussion on that for a follow-up meeting. But motion to adjourn,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Alright, he's adjourned.